Can I welcome members, officers and the public here in the gallery and watching on the webcast to this afternoon's Assembly plenary meeting of the London Assembly. The London Assembly is a voice of London, composed of 25 members elected at the same time as the Mayor in order to hold him to account and scrutinise his policies. This is a plenary meeting of the Assembly, which means that all members are invited to attend. Members are reminded that any electronic device should not be placed in front of the microphones, which must be turned on to speak and turned off once finished. Can I ask the Clerk, Rebecca Arnold, to confirm any apologies for absence?
Thank you, Chair. We have apologies from Assembly Member Cooper.
Okay, thank you. Can I ask the Assembly to note the recommendations set out at item number 2, and can I ask Assembly members to declare any other disclosable pecuniary interests or other relevant interests where they relate to the items on the agenda for today's meeting? Great. Thanks. The purpose of this afternoon's meeting is for the Assembly to formally receive and, in accordance with Section 42B of the Greater London Authority Act 1999 as amended, consider the Mayor's proposed revision to his transport strategy. Joining us here in the Chamber we have Sadiq, Chair of Transport London, and Seb Dance, Deputy Mayor for Transport. Welcome to both of you to this meeting. I will begin by asking the Mayor for a brief opening statement regarding the proposed revision to his transport strategy. The Assembly will then receive an opening statement from the Assembly member, Berry, Chair of the Assembly's Transport Committee, regarding the Committee's response to the consultation on the proposed revision of the transport strategy. After the opening statements, the Assembly will then put questions to the guests for up to 2 hours. Can I ask you, the Mayor, to make your opening statement, please?
Thank you, Chair. In accordance with Section 42B of the Greater London Authority Act 1999, on the 31st of October, I laid before the Assembly a copy of a revision to my transport strategy. Since the publication of the Mayor's transport strategy in 2018, it has become clear that further action is required to achieve the air quality, environmental and health outcomes that will ensure London is a world-class, attractive, healthy city in which to live and work as well as to visit. New evidence on the triple challenges of toxic air pollution, the climate emergency and traffic congestion mean we need to act now to reduce emissions and car use in London. The current transport strategy needs to be updated to ensure these triple challenges are addressed, including as a first step to allow for the potential expansion of the ultra-low emission zone London-wide in that context should I decide to implement it. It also needs to be revised to update and consolidate the policy foundation for any future road user charging schemes. The proposed transport strategy revision does not in itself confirm the ULEZ will be expanded London-wide in accordance with the consultation proposals. However, publication of the revision provides a policy basis that would enable me to make such a decision on the ULEZ expansion subsequently, if that is what I decide to do.
Okay, that's because is that your statement, Mr. Mayor? Finish. Okay, great. Before I go to the Chair of the Transport Committee, can I welcome pupils from the Cyril Jackson Primary School who are visiting City Hall today? Welcome. Great. We will now be receiving a statement from the Chair of the Transport Committee regarding the Committee's response to the consultation.
Yeah. Chair, I beg your pardon, I think the Deputy Mayor for Transport is speaking after me.
I'm content with the Deputy Mayor to speak, although it wasn't on my proceeding notes, but I am content with that. Thank you.
Sure. Thank you. I'm very grateful, and thank you for this opportunity, and thank you, Mayor, for your opening statement. I appreciate the invitation here today, and I want to start really by picking up on the Mayor's last point that he made. It's a crucial one. The intention of the proposed MTS revision is to update the policy foundation within the MTS to reflect developments since it was published in 2018, particularly around our increased understanding now of the triple challenges of toxic air, the climate emergency, and of course traffic congestion, and what is needed to address those three challenges. This revision is a necessary step for implementing a London-wide expansion of the ULEZ, but the proposed expansion will not happen without a subsequent decision from the Mayor to confirm it. This revision, therefore, would provide the policy basis on which the Mayor can make that decision. So this really is a process point. The Mayor has approved a revision to his transport strategy, the MTS, which is a very good strategy, by the way, and one that we are delivering, albeit there is a long way to go to deliver it fully. In fact, it is a strategy that takes us all the way to 2041, so we will continue to work with TfL to jointly build ambition towards this long-term vision. I'd like to thank the members of the public that we have in the chamber here today, including many who have campaigned unceasingly to raise the profile of the toxic air crisis and to raise the need for action. And Chair, as you have correctly identified, we are joined by pupils from the Cyril Jackson Primary School in Tower Hamlets, and it was my pleasure and the Mayor's pleasure to meet with them earlier. I am very, very grateful, hello again, for you being here today. In practical terms, the proposed MTS revision will take the form of a short addendum to the 2018 strategy. The revision comprises a narrative and a new proposal, Proposal 24.1, to supplement the existing Proposal 24. We will say much more through today's session about what the revision means for London and for Londoners, but I think it's worth being clear at this stage that this proposal is a small addendum to an extensive and comprehensive document, the MTS. For clarification, the text of Proposal 24.1 is: the Mayor, through TfL and the boroughs, will seek to address the triple challenges of toxic air pollution, the climate emergency, and traffic congestion through road user charging schemes, including by expanding the ultra-low emission zone London-wide. This is the same text that was consulted on by TfL. The preceding narrative explains the triple challenges of toxic air pollution, the climate emergency, and traffic congestion that London is facing, and why traffic reduction is crucial for tackling them. Again, it's crucial to understand what the MTS does and doesn't do. It establishes a clear direction of travel by setting out the Mayor's vision for London's transport system, along with the evidence base to support this. But just because a proposal is in the MTS, it doesn't mean that it will necessarily be delivered immediately. We have followed a clear statutory process in developing this proposed revision. Any change, any substantive change to the MTS requires a public consultation, as was the case in preparing the strategy in the first place in 2018. You will know that that contained itself a proposal to expand ULEZ to Inner London in advance of that scheme decision. A revision must also go through several further statutory processes, including consultation with statutory bodies, a strategic environmental assessment, an equality impacts assessment, and a habitats regulation assessment. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I look forward to answering your questions.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. We will now receive the statement from the Chair of the Transport Committee regarding the committee's response to the consultation on the proposed revision to the Mayor of London's transport strategy as set out in the agenda. The Transport Committee sent a further response to the consultation on the 16th of November 2022, that's yesterday, which has been circulated to Assembly members separately and is available on the GLA's website. Can I ask the Chair of the Transport Committee to make her statement, please?
Thank you very much, Chair. So in this statement now, for 5 minutes, I'm going to be speaking as the Chair of the Cross-Party Transport Committee. Now, the committee has not produced a consensus view on the proposals to expand the ultra-low emission zone themselves, but we have done scrutiny both on the ultra-low emission zone expansion and the changes proposed to the Mayor's transport strategy, and we've made recommendations and comments. I will outline the process now and those recommendations ahead of the party groups asking questions of their own and us all debating and voting on the change at the end of the meeting. Now, the Transport Committee held a long meeting in two parts on this issue on the 12th of July. Our guests were officers from Transport for London and the Mayor's team, as well as Inclusion London, Mums for Lungs, the RAC Foundation and the Federation of Small Businesses. We heard really interesting evidence from them. Mums for Lungs wanted to stress the awful impact of air pollution on health, particularly of children. Inclusion London made the case that deaf and disabled Londoners will be disproportionately affected by the proposal without further discounts and exemptions. For the RAC Foundation, their director told the committee there are several groups of Londoners that will be disproportionately affected by the proposals, including low-income households, disabled Londoners, small businesses and parents travelling with small children. He told the committee of the need to find the right balance between promoting the health benefits of improving air quality and the mitigations needed for those that will be affected in this way. We heard from the Federation of Small Businesses that the main impact felt by small businesses would be the cost of upgrading vehicles and provided suggestions to tackle this, including scrappage. We made recommendations to the ultra-low emission zone consultation based on these issues, including that there should be improved criteria for disabled people, including that there should be more committed to cover the additional cost of replacing adapted and modified vehicles for disabled people as part of a scrappage scheme. And we recommended that TfL should consider putting together a comprehensive scrappage package to support all the different groups who might be affected. On the Mayor's transport strategy, we agreed that the changes proposed to the MTS itself did provide some clarity on how TfL planned to develop future smarter, fairer road charging schemes, and we asked them to look at more carefully at the different people affected. We also recommended for additional clarity that the issue of road danger be included in the wording of the proposal. Now, we deferred our final comments on the MTS itself until we had seen whether our recommendations on that had been acted upon. And before finalising our response, we asked the Chair of the Assembly to write to the Mayor on a couple of issues. We wanted clarity on the legal rationale for having a revision to the MTS. We also wanted to know why the consultation responses had not been published alongside the proposed amendment. We got answers back from the Mayor's Chief of Staff, and from that we understood it is necessary to amend the MTS in order to proceed with any expansion of the ultra-low emission zone. And we also heard that he said it was inappropriate to publish the results of the consultation, which, quite honestly, we weren't that convinced by. Now, we didn't reach a consensus again on opposing or agreeing to the ultra emission zone, but we did have some recommendations which I'll read them out now just quickly, and they are the view of a majority of the committee, just to be clear. We're very disappointed about the fact that the consultation results were not published. We weren't persuaded by the argument put forward by the Mayor as to why this shouldn't be in the public domain for the Assembly to make its recommendations based on the full knowledge of the facts. We think that transparency in decision making is important, and we today are going to be decision makers. Now, ultimately, in considering these proposals, we need to take into account it is likely there was significant opposition as expressed by those who responded to the consultation, and we also need to consider the wider context of the long-term public health impact of road traffic and air pollution and the impact new policies could have on that. That is what the majority of the committee agreed as its conclusions to present to you today, and we look forward to discussing all these issues in our plenary meeting today and debating amongst ourselves what conclusions to come to. Thank you.
Thank you, Assembly Member Berry. We will now move on to the question and answer session. There will be lead-off question from me as chair to each of our guests. Assembly members then may put supplementary questions to our invited guests. Please could I ask Assembly members to specify who they would like an answer from when they put the question. Guests, we would like you to be succinct in your answers, please, so that we can get through all the questions we have for you. So the first question will be asked by me. Then there are 4 set questions from each of the leads from each of the groups, and then the other members can come in afterwards. So the first lead-off question to you, Mr. Mayor, is what will the proposed revision of the Mayor's transport strategy mean for the work of Transport for London and for Londoners?
Thank you, Chair. So the Mayor's transport strategy lays out the policy foundations of the work of TfL and indeed my mayoralty, not just now, but in the long term. As Seb Dance indicated, it's a plan that goes to 2041. It's a 25-year long-term plan. The ambition is to, by 2041, to have 80% of Londoners either walking, cycling or using public transport. And what the explanation in advance of 24.1 sets out are the 3 main reasons why we seek to revise the Mayor's transport strategy. It's the triple challenges of air pollution, more than 4,000 premature deaths a year directly attributable to air pollution, children with lungs that are stunted forever, adults with a whole host of health issues from asthma, cancer, dementia, to heart disease attributed to air pollution. The second big issue is in relation to, and the second challenge is climate change. You'll have heard the need to ensure that our temperature of our Earth doesn't rise by more than 1.5 degrees, and you'll be aware of the links between carbon emissions and car usage. If we're going to get to zero carbon by 2030, we've got to reduce by about 27% the amount of cars driven usage in London. And the third challenge is congestion. A city of a population of north of 9 million, if everyone jumps in our car, we simply will be even more congested than we are now. Now, the current transport strategy is very, very good, but we've gone as far as we can within the parameters of the current MTS. We have the world's first ultra-low emission zone in central London. We've expanded it to the north and south circular, which are within the parameters of the MTS. What has that led to? A reduction of almost 50% of the toxic air in the centre of London. Fewer people dying prematurely, fewer people with health issues. But the improvement we've seen in central and inner London is far quicker and speedier than in outer London. And we have some of the figures we'll go into later on in relation to the air pollution in outer London and the concern we have in relation to the progress or lack of progress made there. And I'd remind colleagues that notwithstanding us satisfying the MTS, doing all that we can, a lot done, there's a lot more to be done. Roughly speaking, 500,000 people in this city with respiratory issues. More than 300,000 of those are in outer London. Far larger number of people with asthma in outer London. Far larger number of premature deaths in outer London. The progress has been far slower in outer London. So what the policy foundations 24.1 allow us to do is address those triple challenges, but at the same time to the work required for a smart road user charging scheme. Why is that important? Because we want to get rid of the congestion charge, get rid of the ULEZ and have a smart road user charging scheme that could look into how old is your vehicle, how pollutant is your vehicle, what time of day are you driving, are there alternative public transports near to you, and so forth. So what 24.1 does is enables us to have the foundations to do the further work required going forward. This does not predetermine my decision on whether I decide to expand the ULEZ or what sort of smart road user charging scheme we have, if we have one indeed. What it does, though, is lay the policy foundations and the parameters for us to be able to do so.
Thank you for that comprehensive answer. Did you want to add anything else, Deputy Mayor?
No, only to add that, that I think there's a perception perhaps that outer London doesn't have the same issues to do with air quality that inner London does, and nothing could be further from the truth. In fact, the highest number of premature deaths are actually in outer London boroughs in Bromley, Barnet, Havering and Croydon have the highest number of attributable premature deaths from air pollution. So this is very much about creating the policy foundation for expanding what has worked successfully in inner and central London, and having the potential for a decision to be made on whether or not further action should be taken in outer London.
Thank you. And the first question is now on behalf of the Labour Group from Assemblymember McCartney.
Thank you. And Mr Mayor, I think you've clearly set out the triple challenges that we are facing as a city, and you've highlighted that the inner London ULEZ has been extremely well delivered and has made drastic improvements to air quality. But many parts of outer London are not blessed with the same extensive public transport links that inner London is. And your MTS is about encouraging people out of cars and onto public transport or more active travel. What will you seek to do in the forthcoming years to make sure that we improve that public transport system in outer London?
It's a really important point that you raise, Sadiq McCartney. So we've got to make it attractive to leave your car at home. Now we know a lot of journeys, more than 2/3 are short journeys in cars, which could be walked quickly or cycled quickly. So we're going to make it easier and more attractive to walk and cycle. But some journeys you need to use public transport if you're not going to drive your car. So one of the things that we've made sure we did, even though the COVID funding deal from the government was so unfair, is to ensure that there are no reductions of services in outer London, really important, despite pressure from the government to reduce those services. So we've got to keep what we have and add some. There's been some progress in the recent past in relation to additional options for public transport in outer London. The Elizabeth line. A lot of the stations that are serviced are in outer London in the east and the west. The Barking Riverside extension, another example of a massive infrastructure project for outer London. The key challenge we have in TFO is to make sure we can have additional bus services in outer London. There's an opportunity to do so in those parts of central London where there's a duplication of services, so we can switch some of the public transport in central London where there's now, in some areas, bus, tube, Elizabeth line, overground options, and good walking options, and good cycling options. Switch some of the spending there to outer London, which is really important, and we're cognizant of the need to keep what we have in outer London and improve what we have in outer London.
Thank you. And that leads me on to my next question, which is before we had the final funding settlement from government, you had consulted on cutting some bus routes, including in my area and in Enfield and Harringay, outer London. I think many of us objected to those because we see the bus as really important. We don't know what your decision is yet on those bus changes, but can you just assure me that you will be taking that into account and seeking to reduce any service reductions there when you're considering whether to expand that ULEZ or not?
Look, one of the things that we had to do as a consequence of the COVID deal with the government was to reduce by 4% bus provision, and we tried to make it as least bad as possible in relation to the routes being consulted upon for reduction or cuts. I'll make a decision in the next few weeks. I think evidence of whether the consultation has been meaningful is whether we proceed 100% with these 4% cuts or whether I'm able to make any changes. I'll make this point, though. If I do make changes to the proposals that we had to do because of the government funding, we'll have to find the money elsewhere. And it goes to a question asked of me earlier on today in Mayor's question time about all these are choices. And so it's important that I hear from you, as I have, about in your part of London, some of the poorest Londoners ride on buses. In your part of London, there aren't alternatives often to buses. And so those are some of the points that have landed with me. But I've got to be honest in relation to the consequence of me reducing the plans consulted on. Means, frankly speaking, the job that Seb has, one of them, is to find savings elsewhere or to increase revenues elsewhere.
Thank you. The next question is from Assemblymember Caroline Pigeon.
Thank you very much. My questions are to you, Mr Mayor. Back in July 2017, if you can think back that far, I questioned you about your draft transport strategy. And I asked why it didn't contain proposals to change the congestion charge or to bring in road pricing to tackle congestion. Why it didn't go further, and I said it doesn't really cover the next generation of road user charging systems, and will we see that in your final strategy? And then in September 2017, I'm sure you recall, the Transport Committee wrote to you and encouraged you to look at our recommendations about reforming the congestion charge to target congestion more effectively and to develop proposals for a wider road pricing scheme that could integrate all existing road charges. And it was set out in our report, London Stalling, when finalising your transport strategy. But you chose not to include these areas despite our recommendations to you. Move forward to now, do you perhaps regret not listening to those suggestions from us to be bolder in this area in your original transport strategy, because then we wouldn't be here today having to amend it?
I hope you'll forgive me for not recollecting every letter you've written to me.
Been a few.
Or every lobbying you've done for me. But if the point you're making is you foresaw 5 years ago the need for this, and that's why you'll be very enthusiastically backing the revision to the MTS, of course, I support the point you are making. The wider point is, firstly, so I acknowledge that, by the way, if that's, and I've got to take it on the chin. If it's the case, as you're saying, and of course I believe you, that 5 years ago...
I've got the transcript that I raised it with you. And in fact, one bit at the end, I'm just going to add to it.
I was about to flatter you, but if you're going to cut me off, that's fine.
You can come back to that. I'm getting rather a lot of nice comments at the moment. But let's...
you must be retiring from the Assembly, Caroline.
Something like that. No, I'm not dead yet. I've got 18 months to go. But I talked about Professor Begg, who came before our committee, and he said there's no substitute for mayoral leadership on this issue. And I was saying that to you 5 years ago. So just really wanting to I think understand perhaps sure. Now whether you might regret perhaps you should have been a bit bolder back then rather than having to come back with an amendment today.
Well, what's even worse is Professor Begg was one of my advisors when I was in government in transport, and so I hope he's not watching this because I'll be blushing from that embarrassment. Look, listen, of course I believe you when you say you made the case 5 years ago. I'd make this point in a gentle way. Firstly, I accept you made the point 5 years ago. Since then, a number of things have happened, right? So since 2017, we've introduced the central and ULEZ and expanded it. We've declared a climate emergency. We've published the report from Energy Element. The WHO have themselves changed their guidance on what is a limit that they would find acceptable in relation to, and it's a lot less than what the government finds acceptable. We've of course had COVID since then and learned a lot through COVID. So firstly, I accept, by the way, that had we acceded to your recommendation, we wouldn't be here today. But in fairness, a number of things have happened between then and now. But I know Seb wants to come in relation to that point. But the one other benefit of the MTS being revised is it's an opportunity to educate the public. And, there would not be people in the gallery and my inbox full up of emails from concerned Londoners, but for this revision being here this afternoon. So I'm grateful for being summoned this afternoon, because I enjoyed, I think, better than being with the Assembly. But the public interest that has been raised by you sums in me, so I'm grateful.
OK, I've got a couple more questions specifically for you. I'm aware, obviously, this decision about extending the ultra-low emission zone to cover the whole of London is dependent on the amendment to your strategy today, so that you can't be legally challenged. And it is your decision to make, you as Mayor of London. As Liberal Democrats, we've responded to your consultation, encouraging you to look at a comprehensive scrappage scheme, to look at more investment in public transport now to London, and potentially to have a longer lead-in time for this London-wide scheme to help Londoners be able to get there. Are those the sorts of things you'll be considering as part of your decision-making process?
If those are the points you've made in the consultation, they should be in my report that comes to me in the next few weeks. And so I'd be surprised if they're not in the report that comes to me, and I'm sure those are some of the things that the independent consultants and TfL will take on board when they make their report known to me. I just simply don't know. I've not seen the report in relation to that.
Let's move on, because the road pricing is part of this amendment. And I'd like to know, more generally, where you see road pricing going in this city. Pay as you drive, as I think is a better way to talk about it. How are you going to start that big conversation with Londoners? You're welcoming people in the gallery today over the ULEZ, but actually this is about something much bigger. Where do you see that going? How are you going to lead that in the city?
So, listen, I don't want to speak for those in the gallery, but you're spot on. The discussion today is much more than the ULEZ. It's really serious discussions about the next 25 years in our city. I met last week, in fact, Norman Baker, somebody both you and I know well, who mentioned the phrase you used in relation to pay-as-you-drive. But I think we've not seen anywhere in the world. I've looked at Singapore in particular because they're more advanced than we are in relation to road user charging. This being used on the scale of the ambition we have, which is a global city, being properly smart. What do I mean by properly smart? If you go to Singapore, which is the most advanced we have, they're basically, and I say this not in any way disparaging to Singapore, clunky tolls on the roads in relation to distance travelled. Right? And there's some other issues, variations. Some of the things that I'd be keen to see that technology worked up to see if we can do is consideration of the point that Joanne made. If you live in area, ward, borough A, where there's good public transport and you're using the car, question, should you be charged more to use your car than if you live in area B, where there are very few alternatives? If you're using your car in the daytime when we know there's better public transport, should you be charged more than if you choose it in the night time when there's less public transport? So that sort of stuff has not been looked into in other countries, including emissions and other issues like that as well. Obvious things we know are looked into is distance travelled, right? And we've sort of got a version of that in some smaller cities across London. That's the direction of travel that I'd like us to go in. That's why I know there's a lot of pushing, gentle lobbying, I beg your pardon, from colleagues on all sides about the speed of this, but the technology is simply not there. I was criticised earlier on today trying to save taxpayers money by buying stuff off the shelf, but I think it's really important to be cognizant of the value for money when it comes to innovation and technology. And so there isn't an off-the-shelf product we can buy.
But you're going to work up that scheme. And how's the conversation with the public going to take place? Because what I'm wondering is, will London be ahead of the country on this? Or do you see national government? We've seen today electric vehicle owners are now going to have to pay road tax from 2025. The government and Treasury are clearly starting to think about their taxation and what they can fill it with. And if London doesn't lead the way, before we know it, national government will be taking this revenue which could be invested in public transport. So where do you see London in this? Ahead of the game?
I think most of us in this assembly, in the chamber, always want to see London ahead of the game. And in fact, when you see some of the policies we've done, congestion charge, 2003, how many cities in London have followed, how many cities in the UK have followed that? Ultra emission zone, LEZ, expansion, and so forth. So just to answer your question directly, so we consulted on 6 different things. We try to, again, value for money, save taxpayers money in relation to the consultation. And one of the 6 things we consulted on was asking Londoners for their views on shaping the future of road user charging in London, because I think it's first you've got to find out what Londoners want, what they feel, and then obviously we'll use that as a way of feeding into what we say to the technicians, the experts in relation to devising a scheme. One of the attractions, by the way, is the simplicity. We can get rid of the C charge and the ULEZ and the LEZ, and that's attractive, I know, to many Londoners, whether you're for and against any particular pricing scheme.
Yeah, the complexity of the current, range of schemes, nobody understands. Even if they put their registration number into your website, I get people saying, oh, but I'm told I've got to pay this. And it's like, no, it's saying if you drive in that bit, you pay the congestion charge. You are ULEZ compliant. So that's an issue. Wondering, just finally, have you had any discussions with government or Treasury on this issue of road pricing? So
you'll enjoy this. When I was in government that long ago, literally had black hair, it was discussed then. The Treasury found it very attractive as a scheme.
I bet they did.
Both the Chief Secretary and the Chancellor, but there was some pushback because it's you've got to get the public ready for it, right? It's a big decision, and so the civil service in HMT, DFT, and other parts of the government are well aware of the reason why actually the future is smart road user charging, particularly for the reason you mentioned. By the way, you mentioned the budget and road tax for electric vehicles. One of the reasons, obviously, is to bring in revenues post 2025. But one of the ways to have a level playing field is using smart road user charging to get people to pay, not just polluter pays, but usage and stuff. And so I think there is an attraction to doing this. But again, I suspect you're right as well, that London may need to lead as pioneers to give confidence to the government and other cities across the country.
Lovely. Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you. The next question is in the name of Assembly Member Rogers.
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, Mr. Mayor. My questions are for you. I take issue with a couple of points that the Deputy Mayor actually made. He described this revision as a process point and a small addendum, whereas in fact it's neither of those things. What you're asking the Assembly to do today is to give our seal of approval to some very controversial policies that would have a negative financial impact on thousands of Londoners and small businesses across the city. And I'm sure everyone's inboxes have been the same as mine, full of people saying, please don't let this happen. And you're asking us, I think, to make this decision in an environment where there's a distinct lack of information. So I'm specifically asking about, as Assemblymember Berry referred to in her statement, why is this meeting happening before we are seeing the results of the consultation on the ULEZ expansion, on road user charging and on the MTS revision?
Thank you for your question. So the decision today is not whether ULEZ is expanded to out of London or not. The decision today is whether there is a policy foundation for some stage in the future, it could be any time before 2041, for there to be brought in either smart road user charging and or an expansion of the ultra-low emission zone. But I accept the premise of your point. If you are against ULEZ being expanded forever and you simply will never be persuaded for ideological or dogmatic reasons, vote against the revision. Yeah, I accept that.
The point is that we've run this consultation throughout the last few months. We've had thousands and thousands of Londoners who have responded. They will have brought up some very strong views. They've brought up some very strong opinions. They may have come forward with some very, very good ideas. And whether it's me or other Assembly members, do you not think that those ideas, those suggestions, those opinions have bearing on the discussion that we're going to have this afternoon?
No, because the MTS isn't specific policies for a certain time. It's a policy foundation. And so what the MTS does is set out a policy foundation for the next 25 years. And so what's important is for you, with respect, not me, to form a view whether you are against, as a policy foundation, addressing the triple challenges of air pollution, climate change and congestion. If you're against that, then you will seek to block the MTS being revised in the way set out in 24.1. What you were definitely not doing by supporting the revision of the MTS is taking a decision that only I can make in relation to whether the ULEZ is expanded. That's a decision I will take at some stage in the future, but the parameters in relation to individual specific policies are set out within the MTS. But if it is the case that you don't accept the point made in the 3 pages in advance of 24.1 about the triple challenges, if it is the case, then nothing whatsoever can persuade you of the importance of expanding ULEZ to outer London, where there is, as Seb Dance explained, far worse air, or you'll never be in favour of a smart road user charging scheme, then you should vote against this.
I feel that the absence of, we're talking about a policy foundation, but the absence of Londoners' views on that is a significant impedance to our scrutiny function. I feel like it's putting the cart before the horse. I will have more questions, but for now I will leave it there. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you.
Thank you. And next is Assemblymember Berry.
Thank you very much. My questions are also to the Mayor. And you will recall, Mr. Mayor, the election campaign of 2016, where from the very, very start, sitting on platforms with Assemblymember Pigeon and yourself, I would not stop going on about the need for a London-wide ultra-low emission zone and a smarter, fairer road charging. So it's a huge relief to finally see an outbreak of widespread political courage on this matter. I really appreciate it. So for my question, I wanted to go back to what the Transport Committee asked, though, in relation to promoting safety considerations as part of smarter road user charging. We recommended it should be included, thank you, in the new wording for proposal 24.1 for clarity and to ensure it matches the other goals in the strategy. In terms of the kinds of measures I'm talking about, maybe a possible premium per kilometre for non-direct vision HGVs, potentially higher costs at peak times in areas where you want to keep heavier vehicles away from areas with large numbers of pedestrians. These are also backed up by other policies in the strategy, but you didn't add just those few words in your final draft of the amendment to the MPS and to MTS that you put forward. So can you confirm in very clear terms now that even though you didn't do that, you will be aiming to include road danger as a factor in future smart road charging schemes?
Well, can I Chair, firstly also just say to Assembly Member Berry what I said to Member Pigeon. If the case you're making is that you've been making this point for 5 years, and now I've caught up with you.
7
10
years,
10,
20,
so
I don't even know.
I'm looking forward to one of you proposing, one of you seconding the revision to proposal 24.1. But let me be, and I've said this publicly many times, one of the roles I see in a non-patronising way you playing is sometimes chivying me in a direction that, to put it politely, I may not originally want to be chivied into. But the letter from David Bellamy with respect on, I think, dealt with your concerns in relation to road danger. So it says, each element of the triple challenges is already referred to within the MTS, alongside other relevant considerations such as road danger. So
yeah, no, it is, and proposal 21, which is largely about smarter road charging, does list it. But I have noticed that you dropped it from your new proposal when you listed things earlier on that you might do with smart road charging. You didn't mention road danger, and I just want to keep it at the top of your mind and get that really said out loud, very clear.
Sure, that's an oversight, having a brain that works on lists and that not being high enough on the list, and then being worried about being cut short by Caroline. But of course, it's a big concern, and actually, Caroline Russell knows, my commitment to this. Yeah,
we won't let you forget that. Okay, I want to move on to mitigations now, because I think the key to dealing with the impacts on some groups of Londoners that we've uncovered as part of our scrutiny isn't to delay the scheme, but is to fully fund and support a proper scrappage scheme. And one thing you could have done to help with public acceptance here, where there's been a lot of frustration about this, and my inbox is full of people saying I'm not sure how I can afford it based on what I saw from the last scrappage scheme. You could have given more details, you could have made a stronger commitment on funding. I saw, I do have a proposal, and I saw the news.
Is it going to be expensive?
No, well, hopefully not. I saw the news that Uber has just paid to HMRC a settlement of £615 million in backdated VAT. So my question is, can I ask you to put on the agenda when you next meet with government ministers the strong argument that these new revenues, given their source, would be ideally dedicated to support vehicle scrappage associated with clean air zones like our ULEZ, and to support road space reallocation to support traffic reduction measures? Will you ask ministers directly for this funding to go to London and other cities and report back to the Assembly their response?
Well, you and Caroline have done a very good job refreshing my memory of some of the things I've done in the last 6 years. Let me remind you of one of the things that I did, criticised by one political party in here, when I stood up to Uber. When I stood up to Uber, I was told by Conservatives in the Assembly, in Parliament and in government, Uber would leave London. Right? And I was quite clear that the rules apply to everybody, whether you've got corporate lawyers, lobbyists, the big boys, or whether you're a small business. By standing up to Uber, they've made sure their fleet is cleaner than anywhere in the world. And they're now talking to the government about paying back the VAT that you talked about. And that's the difference a mayor standing up for a city can make.
Let's give credit where it's due. It is actually campaigners who have pushed this through. And I'm sure it was an open door as far as HMRC was concerned.
The last time I checked, it was London, that TfL, that stood up to Uber in relation to the licensing, and it was me.
No, licensing, this is the VAT issue.
And it was me that met with the chief executive of Uber, subsequently the new one, rather than the previous one, to explain what I expect from him as a good corporate citizen in our city. And you're seeing the fruits of that in relation to the conversation
Fair
you
enough.
mentioned.
So the question was, will you put this on the agenda and make the case that we should get this funding? Because that's what our mayor should be doing.
Yeah,
not simply shrugging shoulders about not having enough to fund a scrappage scheme, but actually going out and fighting for some funding.
Well, you could make a lot of criticisms from me, but not lobbying the government is not one of them in relation to that. So we've lobbied the government on a number of issues in relation to hypothecation. One of the concerns we have is money's taken from London and spent elsewhere in the country. You'll remember Dieselgate. Seb Darts was in the European Parliament. Other countries, Germany being one, stood up to those manufacturers when it came to Dieselgate. Our country didn't. I lobbied our government to take the companies to court. They failed to do so. So I always mention to the government funds of money that come from London that could be hypothecated for London, but also particularly in relation to issues that address the issue of air pollution, climate change and congestion.
If I could come in there, on this, I can't see the government being that keen on hypothecating any part of VAT. I'm sure people have put that to them before. So I'm not talking about the future revenues, although there's potentially a case for that. I'm specifically talking about this settlement, which is one-off money that is ideally placed to do this kind of capital investment, particularly if we can help Londoners who are needing to change their cars. And from what I can tell from my postbag, very willing to change their cars, but just not sure where they're going to get the money.
Of course, I'll always lobby the government to try and make sure we get our just desserts, but there's nothing stopping the cross-party transport committee also writing to the government.
Shall we write a joint letter then?
I'm always happy to write a joint letter, particularly if it's cross-party. And if you can persuade one or two Tories to sign as well, even better.
Great, okay, great. Now, finally, with my last few minutes, I wanted to go back to the actual wording you were using in this amendment to the
24.1.
to the transport. And to go with the proposal, there's preamble as well. Now, I'm concerned there's a watering down of your traffic reduction targets in this. In the consultation draft, the preamble said at the bottom of page 3, there is more to be done, including taking action to reduce vehicle kilometres travelled on London's roads by 27% by 2030. Now, the final version was different. It said there is more to be done, including taking action to reduce car vehicle kilometres travelled on London's roads by 27% by 2030. Now, that's quite a difference. 27% cut in car traffic is more like a 20% cut in overall traffic. So can you explain this change in wording? It seems like a terrible time to be watering down a target like this.
I can reassure you completely because Seb has the answer.
Seb, can you explain what this textual amendment that slipped in?
Indeed. So basically, the amendments to the narrative are based on updated figures and additional research. In this instance, we don't want to reduce the number of vehicle kilometres made by the bus fleet or indeed other elements of the public transport network. So we are very specific about car vehicle kilometres being the issue here, not elements of the public transport network.
And the thing about that is, if you had just said car vehicle kilometres in your consultation draft, I would have had something to say about that. I'd have said, what about other kinds of vehicles? What about vans? What about motorbikes? What about trucks? What about HGVs? These are all things we do want to reduce. But you didn't. In fact, I was quite reassured by seeing vehicle kilometres. It's stronger than the Element Energy report. I thought, this is good, you're going further than you need to. And then you've quietly changed it.
Just to reassure you, car does not only mean car. We are referring to private vehicle use here, so it's not just cars.
I mean, technically, DFT divide up traffic in their statistics into cars, which includes taxis, and then those other types of vehicles I just listed are given separately. So you're only setting a target for that one column.
I mean, the problem we have is that we need a reduction in private car vehicle kilometres on our roads. That's the main impediment to delivering on the MTS and tackling the triple challenges that we're talking about. It's not an issue to do with public transport vehicles. It's not an issue to do with necessary journeys that are undertaken perhaps by small businesses and so on. Yes, there are alternatives that could and should be explored, but the main issue here is reducing car kilometre vehicle usage, and that's why that clarification has been put in. See,
I don't agree with that. I think we do need to have targets for all kinds of vehicles, particularly when road danger is one of our targets, for example, particularly when road space is one of the things we need to reclaim from vehicles, and quite a few of these types of vehicles use up more space than a private car. And I'm very disappointed because if you had just said car in your consultation draft, I would have objected, and you didn't do that. You've watered it down. You must admit that.
I don't accept it's a watering down, it's a clarification, because if we had set a goal of reducing vehicle kilometres that included elements of the public transport network, we would then obviously be working against the overall objectives that are stated in the MTS. So it is about being very specific about the
Now, the
challenge.
MTS has a target for overall vehicle mile
Sure.
reduction. It's 10 to 15%. It's not very high, but it is for all vehicles.
Sure, but of course there's nothing precluding a wider discussion about what the future road user charging schemes that we've talked about a little bit today, about the elements that they might include, which of course could include a whole range of different vehicle types and charging mechanisms depending on what those vehicle types are.
Can I switch to the Mayor? Are you happy with this? Are you happy that you've watered down your target in between the draft and the final version of this important update to your Mayor's transport strategy, when you're setting all these targets for carbon reduction?
No, I don't accept the characterisation. Look, we just agreed that one of the objectives is by the end of this decade to have smart road user charging in London, right? What we're talking about is not reducing. When we talk, in answer to Joanne McCartney's question, where there's consultation around a 4% reduction in bus usage, what we're not talking about is a plan to 2041 to not reduce other vehicle use other than buses. What we're saying is we're quite clear in the short to medium term we're going to reduce the number of cars being driven in London. In the medium term we'll have smart road user charging in London, and that will address any concerns you have around road danger in relation to vehicles other than zero emission or ULEZ compliant buses and the issues that you're concerned about.
Okay, well, I might have to leave it there for a little while, but and when you say it's a clarification, I'm pretty disappointed that the one thing where I was like, oh, that's impressive in the consultation draft turns out to have been essentially an error. That isn't really good enough from my point of view.
Have you finished? Okay, thanks. The next Assembly member who caught my eye is Assembly Member Desai.
Thank you, Chair. You were asked earlier by Assembly Member McCartney about public transport in Outer London. So, Mr. Mayor, the frequent closures of the district line at weekends for essential works causes a lot of inconvenience for residents in my constituency, especially Barking and Dagenham. The information I've had from TfL does not address my concerns. This has been going on for some years. And the frequent closure of Dagenham Heathway because of the leaking roofs there, and with the recent weather and the rains, means that the station is quite often shut. Please, can you look into these matters as a matter of urgency if you are to encourage people to make more use of public transport?
Chair, look, the member raised a really important point in relation to...
you can write to me if you want, because I'm limited for time.
In relation to public transport out of London, can I make sure that the member gets a response in relation to problems up until now and how we're going to address the issues to encourage people to use those stations?
Thank you.
Thank you. Next is Assembly Member Garrett.
Good afternoon. So, listening to the way you advocate for your policy, I can understand why quite a lot of Londoners would think that it's an obvious and straightforward thing to do. You make it sound like a no-brainer, which really makes it even more impressive that the majority of Londoners tell YouGov that they don't really support it. What I find perturbing is that the way that you advocate the policy, if it's just a straightforward and obvious way forward, why is it that you have to be so dishonest and unclear with Londoners about the impact? So, for example, well, the members opposite are interesting examples, so here are some examples. So I think the Mayor wildly exaggerates the extent to which this will have an impact on air quality in Outer London. We've spoken before, Mr. Mayor, about the Jacobs Integrated Impact Assessment. You weren't familiar with the figures back in June or in July when I mentioned them to you. I'm sure you've had plenty of time since then to look at them, so you will know the figures I was quoting were correct. You pretend that poorer Londoners don't own cars and therefore wouldn't be affected by this. In fact, you were quite disdainful and mocking of my colleague Peter Fortune when he asked you about that. And you know perfectly well that lots of poorer Londoners do have cars. I've given you the figures. I've given your Deputy Mayor the figures from the ONS. And although the MTS change and sort of hidden within the consultation questions were lots of questions about road user charging, and in this discussion here today we're talking about road user charging, you, in your public conversation with Londoners, have been almost silent on road user charging. So I think Londoners are not really aware that this, is an enabling change that would allow that to happen. And so I just wonder, why it is that you're not able to be quite so straight with Londoners and say, look, it will make a small impact on air quality. You acknowledge it will have an impact on poorer Londoners with cars. You think that's a trade-off that's worth it? Do you not think that would be a more honest way to pitch your policy?
Before you answer, Mr. Mayor, I'm really concerned whether you word dishonest you used. Can you just reflect on that word, please? Is that what you really meant?
I think it's inaccurate, and I think I've given the Mayor accurate figures often
so
enough that I'm very surprised that he doesn't know what the accurate figures are.
I don't.
Is that okay, Chair?
You can use the
Chair,
word
you don't
inaccurate.
mind the word liar, so dishonest is much
Hang on.
kinder.
Look, I can see all the groups coming back at me, but let me say I made a judgment call that dishonest ride is an implication that the Mayor has purposefully, with intent, lied to us, and I don't accept that. So that's why I asked the member to reflect on, and the member is quite competent, Assemblyman Best, to answer for himself.
So sorry, Chair, so just reflecting on your ruling, would you accept if I said that I find it surprising that the Mayor consistently quotes misleading figures, given that I have repeatedly given him the correct figures, and the figures were in the report, which he presumably must have read because TfL commissioned it. Would that be acceptable?
That's fine.
Okay. That's fine. But I think we need to be careful about what the words we use, right? Because we do need to imply that someone is intentionally holding back. Thank you.
I mean, to be fair, the Chair, the Mayor has called people a liar sitting in this chamber, and you have not stopped him. I have not called anyone a liar.
I don't think he's called any Assembly member here a liar.
So, Mr. Mayor, wouldn't an honest appraisal of the policy proposal that you have on expanding ULEZ to Outer London be that it would make a modest change? It would, about 98% of the NOx would still be there, all the particulates would still be there, no change to carbon emissions. That's the change we're looking at on air quality, and it will have significant financial impact on less well-off Londoners with older cars.
Chair, I don't want to mislead the chamber. I have called Boris Johnson a liar. Boris Johnson is a liar, and I'm very happy to say that again and again in this chamber and elsewhere.
The ruling I made was he wasn't in the room when you said it.
Okay.
So can I just clarify, Chair? Would it be okay if the Mayor's not in the room?
So in relation to I think the assertion is that I'm misleading Londoners about the health benefits of the ULEZ. I'm quite clear. You can try.
Change in air quality was the question that I asked.
I'm quite clear. If you look in isolation, particular concentrations of PM2.5, you can sometimes get the impression that the air won't improve by reducing the number of non-compliant vehicles. The evidence I have is quite clear in relation to the quality of air in those parts of London where the ULEZ has happened, the quality of air in those parts of London where the ULEZ hasn't happened. The top 10 boroughs with the worst air quality, I've got the figures here, are all in outer London, including Croydon, which has the third worst air and the third largest number of premature deaths per year. I think those figures will move in the right direction if we were to have policies similar to those in central and inner London. What some people can do, because they're ideologically opposed to the ultra-low emission zone, is to cherry-pick an individual figure on concentration of PM2.5 without looking at the wider context of emissions and tonnes of carbon emissions reduced, particular matter nitrogen dioxide reduced. And that's a conversation and discussion you can have in a debate. I don't think the member's been dishonest, by the way, in doing so. It's just a debating tactic we learnt in school.
So you mentioned Croydon. So the integrated impact assessment suggests that there'll be no change in PM2.5s, there'll be no change in carbon levels, and that NOx will go from 19.5 micrograms per cubic metre to 19.2. So, in other words, about 98% of the NOx that's there now will stay there. That's the integrated impact assessment verdict. Now, nobody can predict the future. What you're trying to do is predict the future based on what happened with the previous expansion. But as we've spoken about before, the previous expansion to the North and South Circular was into an area where there is a lot of public transport availability. And if you look at a map of London that shows the public transport accessibility levels, a sort of heat map of where you've got good public transport, and you overlay on that a heat map of where Londoners own cars versus don't own cars, they look very, very similar. And then you overlay onto that a map of where ULEZ is and where you're proposing to put it, looks very similar. And so what you're suggesting is that by expanding ULEZ into an area where there's lots of public transport, and people already didn't own that many cars compared with Outer London, and they switch to public transport, you'll see the same result in Outer London where there just aren't alternatives. So you accept that, I mean, the alternatives of switching to public transport in Outer London are not as good and aren't going to change before August.
Well, this goes to the very first question that I think Joanne McCartney raised in relation to alternatives to car usage in Outer London, and I accept the point that we need to be keeping at least what we have and improving public transport in Outer London. But the figures I'm going on, based upon the assessment that has been done, is with a London-wide ULEZ, we'd expect to see 70,000 switches to compliant vehicles by 2023, 44,000 fewer non-compliant vehicle cars seen in London every day due to behavioural change. Could be walking, could be cycling, could be trams, could be buses, could be tubes.
So which of those are we gonna get
46,000 non-compliant cars
before
remaining. 16,000 expected to switch to compliant vans by the end of
Sorry,
2023, and 26,000 non-compliant vans remaining. So that means you are seeing an improvement in air quality in Outer London, including in Croydon.
But what's your theory of how people are going to switch to public transport when they aren't already switching? It would only be a minority of vehicles that this would affect, in any case, in your initial proposal. And the public transport isn't going to change by August, is it? There's nothing new going to happen before August. No new trams, no new crossrails.
Well, this is by the end of 2023. And so the same, by the way...
So what, new trams by the end of 2023?
The same points were being made by people from this part of the chamber in advance of T-Charge, in advance of ULEZ, in advance of the expansion to North and South Circular. And in all three cases, the assessments that were made by TfL proved to be true. And so bearing in mind on 3 occasions, out of 3 occasions, they've got it right. That's a factor when it comes to me receiving my report whenever I do in the next few weeks, when it comes to me making a decision.
Sure, we know that despite your book, you haven't made a decision yet. Let me then turn to road user charging.
What's it called?
Turn to road
Breathe
user
by
charging.
Penguin.
So, I mean, you've just said it was written by a penguin. I haven't said that. The road user charging element of this consultation, so there's a fundamental change in the MTS that is about road user charging. Do you think Londoners are aware of that? Do you think you've engaged with Londoners in a conversation? Because as far as I can see, you've spent the whole summer since March talking about ULEZ and air quality. You've made essentially no mention of road user charging, but now you want to insert that into the document.
I think the member misunderstands what the MTS is. And so let me be quite clear and just explain. So this is a policy foundation which allows us in the future at some stage to look into proposals for a road user charging scheme. As and when we decided to proceed with that, there'd be, of course, a huge amount of engagement, a huge amount of consultation and work being done in advance. Nobody is suggesting, for example, by August of next year, there'll be a smart road user charging scheme in London. Nobody would expect that.
No, but no one is suggesting that. Of course, it's a straw man argument. But the MTS would now contain authorisation for you to work on road user charging, which you've not really properly had a conversation with Londoners about. But you would argue that you've now got that authorisation in here. It's what we're being asked to vote on today, isn't it? Whether we would object to that happening.
Well, no, the current MTS says that these schemes are kept under regular review. And what we're saying in the revision, we're using the opportunity provided by 24.1 in relation to the policy foundation to move forward and ask Londoners for their views in relation to a smart road user charging scheme. This is the first time.
There'll be another consultation specifically about that, will there? If it were to happen.
So
about smart road user charging, there would be another consultation before that would happen. So your view is you don't, on the basis of this consultation, don't have authorisation now from Londoners to proceed with that.
No, so I think you're misunderstanding the MTS from the actual scheme that goes forward. So if we decide at some stage in the future to have a smart road user charging scheme, we would consult Londoners about that.
So why are you inserting it in the MTS right now? Or why are you asking us to agree to insert it in there?
Because it's the parameters of the work we do going forward, and it's the policy foundation for the work to be done going forward. There could be an argument.
So you
why
can't
bother
so
having?
you're saying you can't do research work on it unless it's in the MTS?
What we're saying is that there's no policy foundation
Okay,
for the
but
work we're going
that
to do.
policy foundation is a vague term. Are you saying that TfL people cannot work on road user charging work at all unless this is in here?
Oh, no, we can and we are. The issue
So why
is
does it need to be in here now? That's what I want to know. What does this enable to happen that can't happen now?
because a number of things. Firstly, we're asking Londoners their views on what they'd like to see in a smart road use charging scheme. We're using the opportunity provided by 24.1 to revise the MTS to be explicit that at some stage in the future we'd like to move to a smart...
Why does that need to be in here now is my question.
Because it makes explicit the policy foundation, the MTS, about the direction of travel.
Seb, sure.
Just in terms of the previous amendments to the MTS and indeed the process by which the MTS was devised, it is the case that there were proposals in the MTS that for which they developed public consultation or conversation had not taken place, but which a decision was then later made. So it's about creating, as the Mayor says, the policy parameters in which that conversation can then be had. But as the Mayor has said, there is a consultation specifically on RUC, road user charging, and determining what Londoners' views at this stage of the game are on any potential scheme. So I'm sorry, but it wouldn't be correct to say that conversation hasn't started because it's an explicit part of that consultation.
Well, I think it would be correct. So since consultation started, the Mayor has put out 180 press releases, of which 9 were about ULEZ since March, so that's more or less one every few weeks, and one of them, which was the one right back in March, mentioned RUC. So this is why I'm saying I don't think Londoners really have been prepared for that conversation. I don't think that conversation has been had, but I look forward to a future conversation about that. Thank you, Chair.
Assembly Member. Next is Assembly Member Baker.
Thank you, Chair. Sorry, I was suddenly slightly surprised there. Good afternoon, Mr Mayor, Mr Deputy Mayor. I would like to talk about the transport impact of potential changes to the MTS. So one of the proposed positive outcomes of the revision to the MTS is to combat traffic congestion, and I think that's an outcome that every Londoner, whether they drive or don't drive, would really, really welcome. The expanded ultra-low emission zone 6-month report says there were 21,000 fewer vehicles seen in the zone on an average day. Mr Mayor, what impact would you expect an expanded London-wide ULEZ to have on vehicle numbers and on private vehicle journeys? Sorry, I don't know what the right terminology is now, but I think you know what I mean.
So you're right. The good news is, put aside for a second the T-charge in the central London ULEZ. But when we expanded the ULEZ from a month before expansion up until 6 months afterwards, you're right, we saw a 21,000 reduction in cars being used, a 44,000 reduction in diesel cars being used, and a 67,000 reduction in non-compliant vehicles being used, which is one of the reasons why we can talk about the massive improvements in air in that part of London, but also in congestion being reduced, few vehicles on the road, 21,000 as you suggest. So the projections we have in relation to the end of 2023, so let's work on the hypothetical basis, that I decide to expand ULEZ in August 2023. The expectations are by the end of the year 2023, there will be 70,000 vehicles switching to compliance. That's not a reduction in cars. That deals with the issue of air quality. We see 44,000 fewer non-compliant cars seen in London. That's relevant to your question. 44,000 fewer non-compliant cars, and we also see 46,000 non-compliant cars remaining, and those are the people who will obviously be paying the ultra-low emission zones, and there'll be switches. So we do expect to see a reduction in vehicles. We do expect to see a reduction in diesel vehicles, and we do expect to see a reduction in non-compliant vehicles as well.
If I may, in terms of overall vehicle reduction, it'll be 5%. That's the projection that TfL has. I should point out that in the revision to the narrative on the MTS amendment, some updated figures were part of that revision based on the 6-month report into the effectiveness of ULEZ expansion to inner London. And that actually showed that the number of vehicles that have been removed daily was actually far in excess of the initial projection. So one can assume that the projection for outer London would indeed be even greater than 5%, but there's a 5% immediate reduction in traffic. That's quite an ambitious policy.
So that's so just to check, that's 5%. The 5% you're saying is 5% in cars being used each day, rather than cars existing. Is that right?
Yes,
yeah,
as in reduction in traffic congestion.
So yeah, and thanks Seb, and I'd like to follow this question up in a bit more detail, because I think this is a really crucial aspect of a potential expansion that the MTS gives the opportunity to do, because my view is that the transport impact is less clearly mapped out than the air quality impact, which I think is very, very clearly mapped out. And so when we had the Transport Committee meeting on ULEZ, we did ask about the journeys that were not being made in the existing expansion zone, whether those had swapped to different modes, and how many of those had simply not been being made. And there was quite a large number of journeys that were simply not being made anymore, and that at that time it wasn't clear what sort of journeys they were, whether they were people who just, I don't know, didn't go to the shop, that'd be fine, or whether those were sort of journeys that they were actually quite vital, be they social or for other reasons. So do you have any sense of what drop in journeys and what sort of journeys and people were impacted by the ULEZ in that transport sense, and how an expanded ULEZ might, London-wide, might do that also?
Thank you. Yes, so it's very difficult, obviously, to identify what the cause of a reduction in the number of journeys is, particularly, obviously, given the pandemic and the difficulty in separating the impact of increasing working from home patterns and an overall reduction in journeys. Obviously, what we have seen across the capital is an increase in journeys made in the locale that people live in, and they're predominantly by walking and cycling. We've seen a big increase in walking and cycling across the city already, and that's just because of the impact of the pandemic. So the projection that TfL has is that there will be an increase. It's a small increase, but an increase nonetheless of 1.9% in walking and 1.5% in cycling trips in outer London. It might surprise people to know that the figure for overall for London for unnecessary car journeys is incredibly high. Of all the private vehicle journeys that are undertaken at the moment, 25% can be undertaken on foot in under half an hour. So there is already an enormous. Sorry, I haven't got that right. It's 75%. It's 75% of all car journeys could be undertaken by foot or cycle in under half an hour, by foot or cycle, a combined method, one or the other. So there are already a huge number of unnecessary car journeys that are taking place. If we remove the unnecessary car journeys, then obviously it makes the necessary car journeys much easier. And the necessary car journeys obviously will always exist, but they exist more in outer London, where there is less provision for public transport, which of course, and ULEZ is not predominantly a revenue-raising scheme, but any revenue from ULEZ would then be able to be put back into expanding public transport networks in outer London. If you like, it's a bit of a self-fulfilling cycle.
Yeah, okay. But seem to be saying two slightly different things there, which is that you can't really track the reasons for journeys so much, but you can tell what an unnecessary or necessary journey is. So, I don't know exactly the methodology of this, and I would hope we'd get it, because it is something that we did inquiry about from the Transport Committee, and as we know, we haven't had a response yet. But, those 70% of unnecessary car journeys, 75, I beg your pardon, well, maybe it isn't 75, you don't necessarily know whether saying they can be done in half an hour, does that mean that, the person is mobile enough to do that? Are they carrying anything? Now, I don't know any of this. Apologies, everyone, I'm completely freestyling. But that really does make me a little bit nervous, and this is why I keep banging on this. And I really think we need to understand what the impact is on people's ability to travel and who is not able to travel as a result of the ULEZ expansion and any future ULEZ expansion. It is in the transport strategy, so we should understand that.
No, you're absolutely right. I don't disagree. We're talking about different data sets. So in terms of identifying where the drop in journeys has taken place, it's difficult at the moment with the data that is available to extrapolate what's as a result of the pandemic and shifting working patterns and what other factors are. Of course, TfL will be looking and will have data on that. That will presumably be part of the report that then goes to the Mayor to determine what his decision will be on whether or not to expand ULEZ. So that will be part of the data and considerations that TfL will present to the Mayor. So it's not the question that data doesn't exist, it's just the specific example you gave of the reduction. I can't say
that's reassuring, but that isn't what we were told before. Now, I've run out of time, so I did want to talk about road user charging, but because I thought no one would have, but actually people have. But a very, very short answer. Would road user charging give you more opportunity to target the sort of journeys that the private vehicle journeys that we wanted to reduce, rather than the blunt instrument of the ULEZ?
Exactly that. And in many cases, it might even make it more convenient where there is no alternative to travel by car. Obviously, that will be the exception rather than the rule, but exactly that. It's much more sophisticated. But the technology, I'm afraid, is not there yet.
Thank you.
Thank you. Next is Assemblymember Best.
Thank you. And I was really brought in by Assemblymember Baker's line of questioning there. So, Unmesh actually let Keith finish earlier, so perhaps I will expand on that for her, though I hadn't planned to, because that is the really important point. That's the crux of it, right? We come to these lost journeys. I know a lot of the emails I get are about I go and visit my dad or my mum. I do the shopping for my uncle every week, and I'm not going to be able to afford to make that journey. How are you measuring that? Because I didn't pick that up, and I think that is the biggest question that people are worried about.
Of course. We have to consider, though, of course, that the Mayor has committed that if he were to decide to expand the ULEZ zone, he would be committed as well to a scrappage scheme. So it's not a question that there wouldn't be support for those who are the least able to afford alternatives. And
sorry,
of course,
Seb, we're talking about there's been lost journeys now. There's lost journeys now.
Yeah, but as I said, the travel patterns across the city have changed for a whole variety of reasons, and I certainly don't have the direct attributable figures on whether that's a result of any particular policy. We have seen a huge difference in travel patterns resulting from the pandemic, so it's not possible to make that conclusion at the moment.
You don't think it's possible to conclude that when people have a non-compliant vehicle, they can't change, that's inhibiting them making journeys?
No, of course it's possible to conclude that where people have a non-compliant vehicle, they might make a decision either to drive less or indeed replace their vehicle, or indeed apply for the scrappage scheme which existed for the initial expansion.
That appears to me a question that you should really have a firm answer on. How many lost journeys has there been
course.
because of this initial ULEZ before we're even looking at an expansion into areas where we know that there's the PTAL rates, the access to public transport, are going to get even worse as you go out into this zone 4 times bigger. And if we don't have a hold on how many lost journeys are within this expansion, how are we going to tackle that on a much wider scale in an area where the public transport is much, much worse?
I don't have those figures here. But
and I'm saying it's a very important question.
I said, but just because I don't have them here doesn't mean they're not a key part of the report that TfL will put to the Mayor in advance of his decision.
My point to you, Seb, is that you should have them here.
By all means, I will take that feedback back. But I promise you, this is
it's a bit late. We're voting today, aren't we?
But you're not voting on that. You're voting on the policy parameter on whether or not it's possible to afford the Mayor the ability to make a decision.
So the question that I'd like to ask you is, who do you think that the ULEZ charge is going to affect most?
Well, I mean,
the payment. Who do you think will be paying it?
The people who will be paying it are those who will be driving non-ULEZ compliant vehicles.
Who do you imagine that those people will be?
Well, I mean, these vehicles are very old.
Who will those people be? They're not vehicles. They're not all vehicles. That's not their identity. Who will these people be?
Sure, but in any policy, you're going to have people who will end up paying more than they did before, and you will end up with people paying less.
Seb? Sorry,
than
they're not a policy.
Before.
They're not an old car. They're people.
I know.
Who will
I
they
understand. I understand. You will have policy impacts that are both positive and negative, depending on the individual concern. That's true of any policy. What we have to be clear about here is that we're talking about.
Okay, so you're finding it difficult to describe person. So I'll put it to you on this way. Who's more likely to pay? A big business, I won't give them free advertising, a big business having thousands of miles across the capital making deliveries every day, or a small business running a small florist? Who's more likely to be affected?
Well, who's more likely to apply for any potential scrappage scheme?
Who's most likely to be affected by the ULEZ policy?
Well, I tell you who will be affected. It's the 340,000.
Who's most likely to be affected by the ULEZ scheme of paying? No, that's not the question. There's a question there.
I'm giving you an answer.
Who's most likely to be affected? A big business making thousands of miles across the capital every day, or a small florist who's got one little van? Who's going to be most affected by this policy in terms of making a payment?
If the previous scrappage scheme is anything to go by, then hopefully, if there were a decision to expand the ULEZ, then there would be another scrappage scheme which the Mayor has committed himself
but you know
to
that
introduce.
The other one was, but you know there's people that didn't get to apply for that scrappage scheme. You know that there's people that haven't been able to scrap the vehicles. You know the problems, and I think Assembly Member Berry and Pigeon, I think, actually touched on that earlier, is how so many people that rely on this couldn't use it. So in terms of households, who do you think would be most likely to have a non-compliant vehicle? Would that be a family on a high income, living in a wealthy neighbourhood with a lot of disposable income, or would it be a family on tight budgets who don't have a lot of disposable income? Who is most likely to have a non-compliant vehicle?
So the person most likely to have a vehicle is not in the lowest income
who's
bracket.
most likely to have a non-compliant? Sorry, you're non-compliant.
Can you please allow the Deputy Mayor to answer? You've asked the question 6 times. 6 times. No, that's what you want. That's what you want. I understand that. But I think the Deputy Mayor also has a right to answer. And please give him the opportunity.
Chair,
you may not like the answer you like, but he has a right to give an answer.
But if he's not going to answer the question that I'm asking, then I don't need the answer.
With respect, I think I am answering
I think
the question.
he is right.
Okay,
so give him an opportunity.
Seb, I'll say this really gently, really slowly. Who is most likely to have a non-compliant vehicle?
Well, the lowest income families are least likely to own a vehicle, and yet everybody is affected by the air that we breathe.
Thanks, Seb.
No, and just to clarify, the equality impact assessment will have all of that specific information in it.
You can't answer the question because you know that it's targeting the poorest Londoners.
Assembly Member Best, right? This is an answer question session. This is not a sort of pushing the witness into a box, right, to give the answer you want. Now, he answered the question. We've heard the answer. Let's leave it alone and let's go to the next person. You have the opportunity to ask the question later on. I was saying Assembly Member Hirani was saying the answer. He hasn't had the answer. I said he'll have opportunity later on to ask the questions he wants. The next is Assembly Member. Actually, it is Assembly Member Duval. You're right. I'm sorry. You are next on the list.
There, Chair.
It's a long day.
Okay, so if we can go back to evidence base for this revision, in September 2021, and this is to the Mayor, the World Health Organization produced an updated quality of guidance. What impact of these issues, of the updated guidance, had on your division's decision to revise the strategy?
Yeah, thanks for your question. Earlier on, Caroline Pigeon was rightly asking about things she'd put to me in 2017, foreseeing the revision to the MTS 5 years in advance. One of the things that's changed is you're spot on. The World Health Organization tightened their guidelines. We've got one of their ambassadors watching this conversation taking place this afternoon, Rosamond Kisi-Debras, in the chamber. Firstly, there are no safe levels, right, of particulate matter or nitrogen dioxide. But what the World Health Organization did was they basically said that the limits they recommend for example, nitrogen dioxide is 10 micrograms per cubic meter. That's what they recommend And what should worry all of us is they then did a recommendation for an interim recommendation for nitrogen dioxide, which is 20 micrograms per cubic metre. And what should worry us is the top 10 boroughs in London with the worst air, all of them exceed the interim 20 micrograms per cubic metre recommendation in, as you said, September 2021. And they're all in outer London, all in excess of these limits. By the way, those same 10 boroughs in outer London also have the largest number of premature deaths. To answer the question, the impact of the policies that Seb was trying to answer was the impact on those families. Those bereaved families, there'll be fewer of those, right? Those parts of London which has the worst quality air, there'll be hopefully less bad air. Most of them don't own a car, but some of them do. And if you're driving the vehicle of a florist that is non-compliant, you're breathing in poison. And you're also churning out poison for other children to breathe in and for other people to breathe in. And a child walking to school is not able to defend themselves from this. They're not driving the vehicle. They're not a florist. Who speaks for them? I'll tell you who does. This mayor and this deputy mayor.
Can you just remind us what those 10 boroughs are?
Yeah, we have a table of those 10 boroughs with the worst quality air, and this is in order of largest number of premature deaths a year. So Bromley has 204 deaths a year attributable to air pollution. Barnet, 201 deaths a year. These are 201 bereaved families, by the way. Croydon, 196. Havering, 178. Ealing, 165 deaths a year. Enfield, 164 deaths a year. These are people, by the way. Bexley, 162 deaths a year. Hillingdon, 155 deaths a year. Brent, 149 deaths a year. Redbridge, 142 deaths a year. It can't be a coincidence that the top 10 boroughs with the largest number of deaths are those parts of London that haven't currently got a ULEZ, right? It can't be a coincidence that the improvements in air quality you're seeing in central London and in London is far greater than any improvements in outer London. And those, I suspect, will be some of the things that go into the report that comes to me in the next few weeks' time. But here's the point. What you're discussing today isn't whether I expand the ULEZ or not. What you're discussing today is a revision to the policy foundation in the Mayor's transport strategy to give permission at a future date to widen the ultra-low emission zones for the reasons you've said, air pollution, part for second climate change and congestion that have been raised by Senator Baker and by other colleagues, and to make progress also in a smart road user charging scheme. And it's quite clear, listen, this is revising the MTS. If you're voting against revising the MTS, you're voting against some of the benefits of health that I've just talked about.
And just to put it into so that evidence base is not only you looking at that evidence, government must be looking at that evidence. And despite some of the mood music at election times, what's the government's real attitude towards low emission zones and your conversations with them over the years, and what have they been saying?
Let me be frank. Government ministers in cabinet and outside have been saying we wish other parts of the country were as bold as you. They're saying, listen, thanks for because of your progress, we may not be in breach of the law anymore. They're saying, frankly speaking, we will not meet the targets we have without you making further progress. And let's also accept that 70% of carbon emissions around the world are caused by cities. I think that brings with it a responsibility to do far more. But it goes to a point I think Caroline was raising about us being a leader. Look, we want to lead the way. And what's disappointing is the government says these things in private. What it should be doing is also showing support in public support financially towards a scrappage scheme, support in relation to the policy and powers we need. Peter Fortune asked some really good questions this morning about heat pumps. And we want to work with the government on collaboration around that as well, because the energy element report I published, transport's one part of it. I've only got power of a third. We need the government support over the other 2/3 as well. And in my view, that's the future of our city and our country post-Brexit, right? High-paid, high-skilled, good jobs, technology, things we can export.
Thank you.
your wishes come true. You said Assemblymember Peter Fortune asked good question this morning. It's over to Assemblymember Fortune now.
Oh, the pressure. Seb, I'm really interested in data. I really like to do sort of an analysis of the facts we got. When you were talking earlier about the attributable premature deaths, was that the Imperial College report you were referring to?
Yes, the 4,000 premature deaths across London.
Because I went to speak to them about it, or we went to speak to them about it, and what I found odd about that data, and I just wondered if you'd reflected on this, is they didn't put in any weighting about age. And they didn't account for some of those boroughs having older populations. And I'm no doctor, but I believe that older people die more than younger people. And so that's going to have an impact on those figures. It also, what was interesting as well, is it took no account for care homes. You get a lot of care homes in outer London, so you have people moving in to a borough such as Bromley for the last sort of 2 years of their life. And those deaths are being counted as attributable as a result of the study that Imperial put forward. Is that right?
No, that's not. The study is looking at premature deaths, as in deaths that would not have occurred had air quality not been
It's not taking
affected.
account for the age.
It is. Also, I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, but are you relying on an analysis from Dr. Mark Stettler by any chance?
No. Was that the YouTube thing? No. I went and looked at the data. We spoke to Imperial College about it.
Yeah.
So I'll follow it up because it made me think about the data.
The data is robust. It's conducted over a long period, not just an 8-week initial period, which is what some of the criticism of it has been based on, and it is solely focused on premature deaths.
Very clear. You believe there is weighting for age?
Well, age is clearly a factor because that's one of the reasons why premature deaths are much greater in outer London because of a greater proportion
because there's more
of older
people there as well. That's what I'm driving at.
But they're still, let's be very clear, they're dying prematurely.
Yeah. I'm trying to get clarity on the data, so it was just a challenge from my understanding. Just going back to the consultation that we were talking about, have you been briefed on the contents or the results of that consultation?
Are you referring to the consultation on the ULEZ expansion, or the consultation on the MTS
the content
revision?
on the ULEZ expansion?
No, I haven't been briefed on the contents of that. The report will be submitted to the Mayor later, but I haven't seen it.
So as Deputy Mayor, you've not seen those results, and you haven't asked anybody about those results?
I've not seen the report, no. As far as I'm aware, it's not ready yet.
Okay, so you wouldn't have been able to brief the Mayor on those results as a result?
Absolutely.
And Mr Mayor, you said again today that you haven't seen the results this morning, and I think on the 13th of October, I think I asked you about 18 times if you'd seen them, and you robustly said that you hadn't, so I may as well make it a clear 20, and just to ask you again, have you seen those results at all?
No, and I've also not seen still the YouGov polling that was referred to this morning. Apologies, I've been busy, but I'll also look at that as well, that somebody referred to this morning.
Okay, so do either of you recall a mayoral briefing in late September that would have come to you talking about the triple threat, among other things? Would you recall that mayoral briefing?
Apologies, I've had many mayoral briefings on the triple threat. I'm not sure what you're referring to.
I'm thinking about the context of that report that was sent to you right at the last 28th of September. Do you remember the contents of it?
I'd have to get back to you on that. I have no idea what report you're referring to. Obviously, we have a lot of discussions about the triple threats, air quality, congestion, and climate change.
Okay. And, I mean, this is information that we're going to get at some point as a result of the FOIs. So we will see what was in it. Okay. Seb, have you done any work, have you started any work marketing for the decision for the ULEZ?
No, certainly not made any marketing, done any marketing work on a decision that hasn't been taken yet.
Okay. And so there's no meetings booked or anything to talk about it at all? Or take a decision?
Not as far as I'm aware, but I'd be happy to check my diary for any meetings on ULEZ, but there's certainly nothing on the basis of a decision which, as I say, hasn't been made yet.
And then once that decision, once you have seen the report, how long do you think it will take you to make a decision? Or Mr Mayor, sorry.
That should have been to you.
Sorry, Mr Mayor, how long will it take you to make a decision?
I want to be as quickly as I can. it just depends how detailed the report is. I mean, in the past, I've had reports, it's quite straightforward. You read the report, you make a decision pretty quickly. I suspect this would be a detailed, long report from what you're saying about the numbers who've responded. And you mentioned the Telegraph article before and stuff. So I'm hoping I can do it speedily, but I don't want to give you a time in case I can't meet it and stuff. I think it's proper that I give it the attention it deserves, and that could be some time. But I simply don't know.
Okay. Thanks very much for your time.
Thank you. Next is Assembly Member Harani.
Thank you, Chair. This is to the Mayor of London, Sadiq Khan. What health benefits have been achieved by expanding ULEZ to the North and South Circular Road so far?
So thanks for your question. I'll bring in Seb shortly to give some more flesh to the bones. But one of the things that we've seen is a reduction in numbers of respiratory issues. We can give you more details shortly. I'm giving Seb a chance to give you that. Number of admissions to hospitals and so forth. We published today, and I mentioned this in my opening MQT, some research in relation to hospital admissions. Actually, as awful as the pandemic was, it gives us a good way to benchmark what's possible when the air is clean, because you can compare those months when the air was clean versus afterwards. And there was a period of time where there was not a single death of a child linked with air pollution. And so we can, that's a horrible thing to talk in this context, so apologies, but it's a good benchmark for us. And so we have got those numbers in relation to the benefits in health terms. And the other thing, just to reassure you, we've done is, as part of the Breathe London initiative, we've made sure that the air quality monitors are around health centres. And so when, for example, I tell you that one of the air quality monitors we have is, in the Princess Royal Hospital in Bromley, we know that the air quality there is breaching the WHO guidelines. We've got them around schools and stuff. And so we're deliberately having the air quality monitors in areas we know vulnerable people may be. And we're seeing benefits in relation to central and inner that we aren't seeing in outer.
Thank you. Did Seb want to come in on that?
Yes, thank you. So in terms of analysing the impact of the ULEZ expansion to inner London, the ULEZ 6-month report has some very clear figures on what it's achieved in terms of reducing NO2 concentrations alongside roads in inner London down by 20%. In central London, NO2 concentrations overall are estimated to be some 44% below what they were. The decrease in concentration close to roads has also been much more pronounced, and of course we know that most deprived areas of London have a propensity to be located near busy and polluting roads. All monitoring sites on the boundary of the expanded zone have seen reductions, and that's obviously on both sides of the boundary, have seen reductions in NO2 concentrations with an estimated 17 to 24% reduction in pollution. There are 67,000 fewer polluting vehicles in the zone on an average day compared to the weeks before the ULEZ expanded. And as has been said already, a reduction in 21,000 vehicles on any average day. So it's overall, it's a 6%, nearly 94% of vehicles seen operating across that expanded zone now comply with ULEZ. So in terms of the health impact, obviously we know the cost of inaction, and we know that reducing these NO2 concentrations and particulate matter concentrations in particular are incredibly important. And one of the things, and it just refers to the point that was made earlier about there not being any impact of a potential expansion of the ULEZ, the potential exists for an additional 340,000 people to be brought under those WHO interim targets. So ULEZ is clearly working in inner London.
Thank you. That's reassuring to hear. I think for me, this is deeply personal as well. I live around 200 metres away from the North Circular Road inside the ULEZ zone, and it's comforting to hear that my daughter will be breathing cleaner air today than I did growing up as a result of the expansion currently to the North and South Circular Road. You mentioned these 6 months on report, Seb. Is there any work happening in terms of the expansion and the impact 12 months on?
Yes, there is indeed, and that data is being worked on now. As of course there is work as well assessing the discrepancy between the increase in air quality in inner London and the much slower increasing quality of air in outer London. And of course, that is also part of the work that TfL is doing in the composition of its report.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Next is Assembly Member Keith Prince.
Thank you, Chair. Mr. Mayor, I just want to try and develop a bit more the point that Assembly Member Baker was making, which I thought was a good point about essential journeys. And you may recall, Mr. Mayor, or do you recall, that at the last PQT, there was a young lady who stood up who was a teacher. She turned out to be one of my residents.
One of your ex-councillors.
And she... sorry, what was that?
Sorry, was she one of your ex-councillors?
No, I think you find that she actually probably voted for the mayor.
Okay.
Okay, can we have
the only councillor to speak? Hang on. The only councillor to speak. The only councillor to speak at that event, I believe, was a Labour councillor. Do your homework, then.
Not true.
So, bearing all that in mind, she has a 2014 diesel car. I won't name her now that I've identified which way she may have gone. She had a 2014 diesel car. She's a teacher, as she explained at the meeting, and she's extremely worried. I met with her the other day. She's extremely worried that she will not be able to perform her work to the best of her ability because she has to move books to and from school. I just wonder whether you could give her some, reassurance, Mr. Mayor. I noticed that I know that this is a strategic document, and therefore it wouldn't go into detail. But she's very concerned about the, whether or not there'll be a scrappage scheme. Her car isn't that old because it's 2014. What sort of reassurance can you give my resident in that? Well, my residents in general, if you are to adopt this and you are to later on this year decide that you will expand the ULEZ zone?
Thank you for that question. Just to follow up your point about the teacher, I'm told she may be the only person who asked a question who wasn't a Tory council lost their seat in the elections last May.
Well, so as I explained, Mr. Mayor, I'm quite happy to have a little bit of banter with you.
It'd be good. That's good to hear.
As I explained to you, the only councillor that was called was a Labour councillor.
We're talking about Tory councillors who lost their seat. There weren't many Labour councillors who lost their seat last May. We won them. So let's talk about.
Okay,
let's
Mayor,
talk about
can
the
you
issue.
ask the question?
Let's talk about the issue. Let's talk about the issue, which is, look, I'd want her to know. In Redbridge and Havering, which is the area you represent, we've got a number of air quality monitors. One of them is at Scott's Primary School. I'm sure you know the school. And what these Scott's Primary School air quality monitors shows us, and she'd be interested to hear this, bearing in mind her passion for teaching and children, is 31.7 micrograms per cubic metre. When you bear in mind the WHO limit is 10 micrograms per cubic metre, and I want her to know that outside Shoots Primary School, 31.7. I also want her to know, outside Oakdale Junior School in Redbridge, the average nitrogen dioxide is 28.1 micrograms per cubic metre. Remind you, the WHO recommends 10 micrograms per cubic metre. So the very children she's teaching are breathing in poison. I don't want her to know, in a polite, courteous way, she may inadvertently, by driving a polluting vehicle, be making that poison worse. And it's really important we understand there are consequences of driving a vehicle that's churning out poison. And so what I'd want her to do is understand why we're considering this policy. I'd want her to understand the benefits this policy has brought to central London. Also hard-working teachers there, incredibly hard-working teachers all over London who've had to make tough choices as a consequence of decisions taken by City Hall. But I'm quite clear in relation to the policy foundation you're discussing today. There are three challenges we're addressing: air pollution, climate change, and congestion. And as the Deputy Mayor said, there will be lots and lots and lots of people who benefit from this policy, but I accept there'll be some who will have disbenefits, and that teacher may be one of those who has a disbenefit.
Not arguing against what you said, Mr. Mayor, but what reassurance can you give her and other essential workers as to what you will try to do to mitigate their circumstances?
Well, one of the things I continue to lobby the government on, I think Sian Berry gently lobbied me to do more, is for their support. They give support to cities around the country in relation to clean air zones and scrappage schemes. The more support they give us, the more support we can give people like the teacher you mentioned and other essential workers. The funding deal as a consequence of COVID was even more unfair than the previous funding deal. There's no point privately telling me how wonderful our policies are if publicly you're not giving us the support we need. That teacher would benefit from a pay rise as well, a pay rise commensurate with inflation, rather than the 12 years of cuts he's seen in real terms, because pay rise of teachers is below inflation.
But that's not within your remit to do that, is it? It is in your remit to set a good scrappage scheme and one that recognises the needs of essential workers, Mr Mayor, isn't it? And that's not being political.
Well, that's the point I'm making. The more support we get from the government, the more support we could give to essential workers.
It's still within your remit. You will be bringing in millions of pounds from the scrappage scheme. It's still within your remit to set aside a scheme that recognises the needs of essential workers and benefits essential workers, Mr Mayor.
One of the points that the paper sets out in relation to the preamble is one of the benefits of this scheme is the NHS saves £10.1 billion. That £10.1 billion, some of that could be used in a scrappage scheme. If congestion is reduced to the amounts that we said it could be done, that saves businesses £5.1 billion. So there are savings to be made in relation to this, but let me be quite clear. The purpose of this policy is not to raise revenues for TfL. It's to address the issues, the triple challenges of air pollution, climate change and congestion.
I'm going to leave it there, but you've got an opportunity to say that you would bring forward a scheme that definitely benefits and advantages essential workers, and I find it hard to understand why you wouldn't want to even give it that consideration.
Thank you, Assembly Member Prince. The next is Assembly Member Ahmed.
Thank you, Chair. My question is to you, Mr Mayor. Mr Mayor, as you know, ULEZ compliant vehicles were available from 2005, 17 years ago. If you do decide to expand the ULEZ, what impact will it have on small businesses that have vehicles that are at least 19 years old, 18 years old, and what are the mitigations that you will be putting in place?
Thank you for your question. I listened with interest to the exchange between Seb Dance and Senator Best in relation to who benefits. Big businesses driving around London or a small business person, whether they're a florist or something else. I've not made a decision on the expansion, but what my record shows in relation to the scrappage scheme for central London and inner London is with zero support from the government, we managed to have a scrappage scheme that helped small businesses, that supported micro businesses, that supported charities, and that supported families on benefits. Let me wait and see what the reports from TfL says in relation to the concerns those groups have. I'm a firm believer in helping those who need the most support, and that's one of the reasons why I lobbied the government in advance of today for support for those small businesses in the autumn statement. I've not seen the autumn statement yet. I've been distracted, but I'm hoping there's support there for those small businesses. But as you've said, you can have a ULEZ compliant vehicle if it's petrol 2005 onwards, and if it's diesel 2015 onwards. The scheme that was consulted on was to bring in an expanded ULEZ in August 2023. If my maths is right, I'm a bit rusty, it's 18 years, as you said, from 2005, and 8 years from 2015. So I'm hoping that there are fewer people affected than would otherwise be the case. But the good news is, when I first announced this scheme in 2017, again, there was opposition from one political party here. There were 39% compliant vehicles in our city, 39% within the zone. That is now at 94% compliant vehicles within the zone. Outside the zone, it's now 85%. On the borders of any expansion, it's now 90%. What is the moral of that story? People have changed their behaviour. And that's leading to the improved air that Krupa Sharani was talking about, that is personal to him, and that's personal to Londoners. These are people we're talking about.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Could you just explain whether retrofitting will form a crucial part of any new scrappage scheme if it comes into being?
So I've not made a decision in relation to the scheme being expanded or a scrappage scheme, but both you, Leonie Cooper, Caroline Pigeon on other occasions, and one or two other members have been asking in Mayor's question times, it's perfectly proper, about lessons learned. And I think one of the points that a number of you made is the credits the public transport credits, the retrofit, and so forth. And so I would hope, I've not seen the report yet, I would hope TfL would be cognizant of, if we decided to proceed, if the recommendation is to proceed, if I decide to proceed, if we're able to have a scrappage scheme, that we don't simply, use the scheme that may have been used in the past, but you can tweak, improve a previous scrappage scheme. I've got to explain the context, though. The context is zero money from the government. The context is our funding deal is less good now than it was in 2015. And the context is, it appears, an awful autumn budget with austerity 2.0. So if every pound I spend on a scrappage scheme is a pound less spent elsewhere, it's really important that we have that grown-up conversation in relation to all our policies.
Thank you, and thank you for explaining the context. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Next is Assembly Member Sheikh.
Thank you, Chair, and I think it's just building on the conversation that we are just finishing off with Assemblyman Ahmed about the scrappage scheme. So I just thought it'd be worth, given that we've had a back and forth and we're looking for lessons learned, just to sort of drill down a little bit more into the review of the London-wide ULEZ integrated impact assessment. And I've got in front of me, it says TfL is reviewing the effectiveness of the previous ULEZ scrappage scheme that enabled over 15,000 polluting vehicles to be removed from London's roads to inform the development of any future scheme. So it'd be great just to have a sort of summary so far of what you think those lessons learned are and what the review shows.
Yeah, what's even greater than the summaries, if I could ask Seb Dance to do it, which is the joy of having a Deputy Mayor here.
Yeah, absolutely. So the scrappage scheme, as you say, 61 million for the previous scheme, which removed 15,200 polluting vehicles. As you've heard from the Mayor, the scope of any future scheme would obviously depend on whether or not we can secure support from government as one of the factors. The scale of that is obviously something that will be dependent on some of the work that TfL is doing, again, for the report that will be submitted to the Mayor, a potential view on what a scrappage scheme could look like is another separate piece of work that will be going to the Mayor very shortly. But, we should remark on the fact that other parts of the country have had support for similar schemes, and it doesn't make much sense for the government to deny that support for London. I'm not sure what the rationale would be for excluding London from the same levels of support that have been provided for other parts of the country. So obviously it would not just benefit the capital, but it would have a national impact as well. And I think it would be much better if the government took a holistic approach to the support that it provides, and then we could provide an ambitious scheme that would work for everyone.
No, I mean, I also don't understand the rationale, and I wonder, Mr Mayor, if you might have some insight into it, because I know that in March 2022, we asked the government for £180 million over 3 years to support the scrappage scheme, because we are obviously incredibly invested if there is an expansion of ULEZ to ensure that no one falls through the gaps. That's why we had a substantial scrappage scheme last time. That's why any attempts to have a future scrappage scheme, if we did go ahead with it, would be bulked up and muscled. But why is it, do you think, that the government isn't willing to put money on the table to ensure people don't fall through the gap?
Well, I'm not sure about bulked up and muscled, me or the scheme, but we'll cross that bridge when it comes to it. Look, the clean air zones around the country, in my view, aren't as ambitious as our ultra-low emission zone, yet there is support from the government.
Precisely.
And so we were hoping, with the change of Prime Minister, albeit the same party, there'd be less of an anti-London animus from the government. One of the benefits, probably the only benefit of Liz Truss's premiership, was she was talking less anti-London in those 44 days of the Truss administration. I'm hoping that Sunak and Hunt understand the importance of our city in relation to the policies they care about, growth, productivity and so forth. But also it's the point that I made earlier on, the better the air in London, the less the cost of the NHS.
Exactly.
The less congestion on our roads, the more productive our businesses can be, florist or otherwise. And so I don't quite understand why they'd say no. But as Seb said, we'll have the conversation with the government again, now that we've got a new Transport Secretary and a new Chancellor, and hope we'll have a more receptive reception this time.
Fingers crossed, and I think quoting them the £10.1 billion saved to the NHS from cleaning up London's air would be pertinent. I'll just finish on the last question. For some disabled Londoners, private cars are vital for them to travel around London, naturally. What considerations are you giving to exemptions for these Londoners if the scrappage scheme were to go ahead and ULEZ expansion?
Again, I'd hope that any report that I receive in relation to this, if there's a recommendation, and I agree with it, to expand ULEZ, would look into this issue. Just in relation to my record on this, as Seb said, in the scrappage scheme we had for central and inner London, there was money for disabled Londoners, which is really important. So that's my record. Let's wait and see what TfL's report analysis says, what the recommendation is, but I can understand the importance of some Londoners being able to use a vehicle, and it may currently be non-compliant.
I look forward to you building on that record, Mr. Mayor. Thank you.
Thank you. Next is Assembly Member Deval.
Thank you very much, Chair. In your policies, you've brought about a reduction of PM 2.5s to those living within the central ULEZ zone. Have similar benefits been experienced as a result of the expanded ULEZ?
Yes, let me touch on these figures. By the way, independent experts have said they've never seen a single policy having such an impact on improving the air anywhere in the world, which is really important. And these are independent experts, health experts who say that. So for the original ULEZ, Central London, we saw a reduction in nitrogen dioxide of 44%, PM 2.5, 15%, carbon dioxide 6%. In the expansion to up to the North Circular and South Circular, so we've pocketed that, right? We saw a 29% reduction roadside of PM 2.5. So you've got to remember 15% Central London, expansion 29% reduction in PM 2.5 roadside, 20% reduction in nitrogen dioxide concentrations, 20%. Again, pocket the 44% I mentioned as well. We'll know at the end of 12 months, as somebody asked, the situation with carbon dioxide. So we know the evidence is ultra emission zone, Central London, huge benefits, reduction in toxic air, expansion, huge benefits in toxic air, and I suspect that one of the things the report that I receive in due course will tell me is the benefits should be expanded London-wide. And don't forget, London-wide already receiving some benefits, right? Because if you live in Outer London, you'll drive your car in Central London, you've improved your car, right? The problem is the reductions in bad air in Outer London aren't as good as the reductions in Central and Inner London. And that's why it's really important to recognise the importance of not just addressing the issues of the vehicles that are currently in London, but also if, for example, we were to have all of London as a ultra-low emission zone, those who travel in, if they wanted to bring poison, will have to pay for that.
And is that why the opponents of it, primarily the Conservatives, well, members here, I'm not sure all the Conservative members are the same, try to rubbish that this is just this has a small impact, these reductions are small, particularly around PM 2.5, that you're dealing with smaller numbers here, it's minimal change. But actually, this is the killer, isn't it? This is what causes dementia. What can you paint me some pictures here of what the impact of even these small amounts in our environment is doing to people, right? Doing to people if it remains unchecked.
You use the word killer. It is a killer. We are talking about an invisible killer. The same conversation previous generations of politicians had in the 1950s around smog. You could see the smog, though. You could see it. You couldn't walk more than a metre because of the smog in the 1950s. In the 1950s, there also vested interest against what our brave politicians were doing in the 1950s with the Clean Air Act. The tobacco tax in 1993. The tobacco tax in 1993, there were people vested interest saying, why are you having a tax on fags? Poor people will suffer because the only joy poor people have is tobacco, right? And it's regressive by putting tax on tobacco. The congestion charge in 2003, you'll remember, you were here. Many of us weren't. There were some people against the congestion charge in 2003. The personalities may have changed, but they're sitting in the same place, right? The Conservative group. Again, same arguments, you'd vested interests Congestion charge, reduced congestion, improved air quality. Big policy for its time. The sugar tax. To give George Osborne credit, not words you hear from my mouth ever, George Osborne within his own party had vested interest saying how bad the sugar tax was, brought about huge benefits in relation to, in particular, poor Londoners. And there are examples of vested interest being against progressive policies. And what they used to do with climate change, which is relevant as one of our triple challenges, you'll remember 20 years ago, climate change doesn't exist. We deny it exists, right? Because the science is unarguable now, they don't say it doesn't exist, they're delaying action. And with air pollution, the same thing is happening. You've got a group of politicians and leaders wanting action now, and a group of politicians who can't say air pollution doesn't exist because they've met Rosamond. They've seen photographs of Ella. It does exist clearly, so they're kicking the can down the road, arguing concentration levels in Area A, page 32, paragraph 2.2 in a report to argue their points. The evidence is unequivocal, and that's why it's really important for the policy foundation in revision 24.1 to be amended to enable either this mayor or a future mayor to look into smart road user charging or expanding ULEZ.
So we know low admission zones work. They're proven, aren't they? Despite what a small number would say it doesn't. And can we just then concentrate on the nitrate oxide issues around that and the levels? So what would change in those levels if you did expand to the outer zone? What would be the impact? What's the estimation of that, or do we know?
I last did chemistry at A-level, so I'm going to come to Seb in relation to... I always get confused with my nitrogen oxide and nitrogen dioxide.
And so nitrogen dioxide.
Yeah, there's both. There's quite. And so this is why you bring in Seb, because the
difference between laughing gas and NOx is... reduction in NOx levels would bring 340,000 people under the WHO interim target, so which we must remember is less than the legal target, and is a guideline we should work towards, but actually go much further. So that is the population of Reading, or in a London context, the London Borough of Ealing, being moved into a much cleaner, much safer concentration of NO2. Still too high, but much safer than it is at present.
Thank you.
Thank you, Assemblymember Lavelle. Next is Assemblymember Clark.
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, Mr. Mayor and Mr. Deputy Mayor. Sadiq, it gives me absolutely no joy that one of the boroughs that we talked about a lot today has the second highest rate of premature death. It's the borough where I live, and one of the boroughs I represent, and that is we have the second highest number of premature deaths attributable to poor air quality, and that's simply unacceptable. And that's for the whole of London. So when people think of Barnet as being a green and leafy borough, there are 204 people who have lost their lives every year owing to poor air quality. Until the change of administration in May in Barnet, the council hadn't even acknowledged that we had a climate emergency, and there was certainly no plan to address the climate challenges that we face today. One of the schools that was in the document that Boris Johnson hid as mayor when it was talking about air quality around schools, one of the schools is right down the street from me, and that's now just inside the ULEZ. I'm wondering how many more schools would be in compliance with the World Health Organization's air quality guidance, and how many more children could be breathing cleaner air if you were to go ahead with expanding the ULEZ.
So thanks for your questions, and it's personal to you. So let me just give you an example of why it's so serious. So you represent two boroughs. One is in outer London, mainly, and one is in central inner London. So Barnet, no ultra-low emission zone, Barnet is number 2 in the league table of most deaths a year. 201 premature deaths a year. The second borough you represent is within the ultra-low emission zone, not in the top 5, not in the top 10, number 23. Right? And you know the poverty in Camden versus the lack of poverty compared and contrast, speaking in general terms, in Barnet. Right. So the evidence is clear that there are more deaths in Barnet than Camden. Some would argue it could be put down to age. Well, that may be a factor in relation to, it's clearly a factor. More older people live in outer London. But you can't escape the fact the number of premature deaths are greater attributable to where in outer London. So if you believe in a policy that deals with health issues as well as environmental issues, congestion issues, climate issues, climate change, then you've got to support ULEZ, right? There's a question in relation to the children you raised, which is really important. So I looked at the number for Barnet. In Barnet, on average, we have, it's about 30 micrograms per cubic metre, 30. Remember what WHO said? 10 micrograms per cubic metre. And do you know where I get my figures from? An air quality monitor in Wessex Gardens Primary School, 28.3 micrograms per cubic metre. And the second monitor is, guess where? Martin Primary School Playground. Playground, 30.5 micrograms per cubic metre. You will know many of the playgrounds in our city, for historical reasons, are next to main roads, right? And there's poisonous vehicles being driven next to those roads. And that's why it's so important to give us the policy foundation to look into policies to address the triple challenges: air pollution, life or death; climate change, life or death; congestion, £5.1 billion to our economy per year. I think all three are important.
Thank you for your answer. I do know both of those schools well, and in fact, Wessex Gardens was in the first council ward I served, and they are right alongside the Hendon Way, which is heavily congested, heavily polluted, and there's some good work going on there, and the air quality monitor is certainly helpful to reflect on that. When we talk about these schools, though, I'm also wondering about, there seems to be some idea that we heard earlier that age is a factor, and actually Barnet does have a significant number of care homes and older people, but it's important to reflect that poor air quality affects them too. It's not somehow, death becomes you because you're older. If these people are still dying prematurely because of poor quality air and having a reduced quality of life because of poor air, that's not good enough. So I want to thank you for your work on that. But I'm also wondering, in terms of poverty, do we have any indication on the impact better air quality would have on poorest Londoners?
Yes, thank you for your question. So, I mean, you're absolutely right. You hit the nail on the head. There is no safe level of dangerous pollutant in the air. Our goal is, and our aim must be, to reduce it as much as possible. And it's not good enough to say that only one section of society is impacted by poor air, because as we know, we have Rosamond with us. We know it's not one demographic. It affects everybody, young and old. And when it comes to the poorest Londoners, we know also that people in the lowest income groups are more likely to live in areas that are worse for air quality, be they by main roads, be they in areas where the mitigations are less available, and that the poorest Londoners are also less likely to own vehicles. So there's an equity point here that people who have no ability to do anything to ameliorate the situation are themselves subject to the worst concentrations of poor air and particulate matter and NOx emissions that are damaging their health day in, day out. So this is an equity issue, but you're right to point out this is not an issue that affects just one demographic. It affects everybody, but it affects some people much more disproportionately as a result of factors over which they have no control.
Thank you so much for that. Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. And now, Assemblymember Hall.
Thank you. Thank you, Chairman. Mr Mayor, this revision to the Mayor's transport strategy is being regarded by the public as a vote on ULEZ. Whether that's correct or not, that is the perception of Londoners. Now, given that, and given the fact that we have all been elected to represent Londoners in our various places, we should be listening to what Londoners are saying. And therefore, I do not understand why you won't let us know what the Londoners think in your consultation before you even brought this here. And it's no good you sitting there saying that this is all just around the Conservatives. I mean, the last time I checked, Sian Berry is absolutely not a Conservative. She'd be very welcome, of course. But she also has asked that that this consultation be published. And those who responded to the consultation also gave their opinions on the MTS changes. So given that we're here to represent Londoners' views, given that we've asked Londoners their views, surely we shouldn't just rely on the YouGov polls, which the one we've just done, which we will share with you, say 60% of people don't want. The information we've heard actually is that your consultation says that Londoners don't want it. But why on earth can't we see that so that we can make informed judgments on whether we think the Outer London ULEZ should go in or not? And that applies to your members as well.
Well, Chair, we'll have to wait to see whether Sian Berry votes with you later on today or not. I'm sure we're all anticipating seeing the outcome of that coalition taking place or not. But in relation to the concerns you raise of Londoners, look, there are two types of politicians: those who play on people's fears and foster theories, and those that address them. And I want to address those people who are thinking that today's decision is a decision on whether to expand ULEZ. It isn't. Today's decision is what we've been advised we have to do by way of amending the policy foundation of the Mayor's Transport Strategy. The consultation that was undertaken this summer was in relation to 6 things: the proposed Mayor's Transport Strategy revision, the expansion of the ULEZ scheme to Outer London, the removal of the annual £10 per vehicle auto-pay registration, increasing the penalty charge notice level from £160 to £180 for non-payment, minor changes to the congestion charge and LEZ scheme orders of an administrative nature, and asking Londoners for their views on shaping the future of road user charging in London. And there have also been a number of impact assessment for a strategic environmental assessment, an equalities impact assessment, a health impact assessment, and an economic and business impact assessment. And when I make my decision in relation to the report that comes to me with the independent analysis, I'll be publishing all those things in the report that comes to me.
Yep, I know, you've said that, and you can't have been listening to what I said. I said to you, Londoners think this is a vote on the ULEZ, and I have said to you, we should be hearing what the consultation says before we go ahead and agree with this, because Londoners are watching what we're doing. As an example, our chairman knows that Hillingdon has had a letter written to us asking us to vote against the ULEZ, and as I say, they think this is a vote on the ULEZ, by both the Conservative leader, Ian Edwards, and the Labour leader, Councillor Peter Curling. They have asked that we do not support the ULEZ extension. People in Outer London, the majority, as it would appear from what we've seen so far, do not want this to go ahead. We represent their views. That's what we're here for. So why on earth didn't you wait to put this through until you had actually published the consultation?
Well, Hillingdon, Chair, has the 8th worst air quality in
Yeah,
London.
you've said that, Mayor. I've heard that. I'm on a clock here. I've heard you comment on that. I'm just saying to you, why on earth could we not have seen this consultation first? And Sian Berry said that as chairman of the Transport Committee.
Well, Chair, I think the Deputy Mayor's already answered that question. I'm happy to repeat his answer if that's what she wants.
Okay, if I have to have a non-answer, then it's all pretty pointless, isn't it? Because I think any Londoners watching this will think that we as representatives of them are doing our level best to try and find out what they as Londoners want. You are stopping us doing that because you will not publish it before you go ahead with this. So I'm not going to get an answer as per usual from you, so I'll move on.
I think somebody more or less give them a chance.
Another chance to wind down our clock. Okay, then,
but you asked the question.
Let's do that then.
You asked the question.
I know, and I get the same non-answer, but if it pleases you, Chair, give me the same non-answer.
I'm very happy to give an answer, which is definitely an answer.
Oh, that's good.
You are, of course, representing Londoners. That's what the Assembly does, and you're doing that today. And we're hearing a range of views on a whole series of issues. But of course, the Assembly makes the decision on any substantial amendment to the MTS based on policy, based on the policy parameters that the MTS sets. So you are effectively making a decision on whether or not you agree that the parameters that we are proposing for the MTS are the parameters that you accept. Now, in terms of the consultation, that of course was a range of different consultations in addition to the substantive one on ULEZ expansion. That report in the main hasn't gone to the Mayor yet. But the question of whether or not you accept the policy parameters of the MTS is, of course, the decision you're making today. So you are representing Londoners in this forum, and you are making that decision on behalf of Londoners as to whether or not you accept those policy parameters.
Okay, you just said in the main hasn't gone to the Mayor. What part of that has gone to the Mayor? They're your words, not mine.
No, I said
in the main, you said.
No, I said the policy, the consultation on ULEZ in the main is how I was describing that policy consultation. The report has not gone to the Mayor.
But nevertheless, the information is there. Our point, and it clearly is coming from the Transport Committee as well, is that we should have seen this, the consultation results, before we're actually asked to put this through. And I'm sure that you should be able to understand that, and I do think colleagues can understand that. And anybody watching this will think this isn't right. We need to know what Londoners say before we agree anything like this. You would not have to put this through if you were not thinking of putting the ULEZ in. You could have put this through if it comes through and the Mayor decides to implement the extended ULEZ. Then this could have gone through quickly because it would have gone through and Londoners would have approved of it. But as it is, you want to put this in so that it can go through quickly if the Mayor decides to put it through.
It's not possible for the Mayor to make a decision on something that he doesn't have the policy parameters to do that.
So
that's why.
What goes first?
This, clearly. Because
but it should be informed by what the consultation has said.
But of course, what you are taking the decision on today is whether or not...
I know, let's not rehearse that again. But I'm saying to you, I've said quite clearly, Londoners consider that this is a vote on the ULEZ.
Of course, I'm sure some do, and you're making the case that they do.
A lot do.
But the reality here is that you are making a decision on whether or not you accept the policy parameters
Seb, I hear what you say. Can I pick you up on something else?
By the way, is in the GLA Act section. That is in
I hear
in
what
the GLA
you say.
49, section 49.
I hear what you say. Before, to Assemblymember Baker, I was intrigued by this 75% of unnecessary journeys. And going back to what she said, because unusually I absolutely agree with this. How on earth, who decides what's unnecessary and what isn't?
I think we've all made car journeys that were unnecessary. I have.
That's not the question.
No,
who decides?
Because it's part of
if I decide myself that was unnecessary, it's up to me to decide whether I don't do it. But it's not for you to say that was an unnecessary car journey.
No, I'm not saying that at all. I'm not saying that at all. Have you ever been stuck in traffic and thought, my goodness, wouldn't it be better if there were fewer cars on the road? Because on this journey that I'm making now, have to travel by car for this particular journey. There will be many of us who have to make necessary car journeys. But there are many of us. There are many of us who occasionally get in the car because we might think it's the easiest thing to do, or perhaps we just feel that way. Shouldn't we all have a discussion with ourselves as to whether or not that particular journey is necessary?
Listen, the discussions I have with myself don't go around, is this an unnecessary car journey or not?
Perhaps they should.
Well, says you. Who are you to tell anybody whether it's a necessary or unnecessary journey?
I have that same decision-making process whenever I decide which form of transport I'm going to take from A to B. Of course we do.
Well,
we all make that decision.
Well, and normally, if you know that you could walk, or you know you could run, or get on a bicycle if you own one, or anything like that, but lots of us would say that we've got to get somewhere quickly and get back, and we haven't got time to walk. And don't forget...
Which is then a necessary car journey.
Yes.
So wouldn't it be
so
better
who
if
then
that was then easier?
estimates 75%? Where do you get those figures from?
Well, these are based on a study that TfL does. I have to admit, I don't know where those figures are from. I'm very happy to corroborate
well, I'd be
the
very
source of that
interested
data.
to see them.
But can we agree,
I will happily write to...
that you write to,
yeah, I will do that.
write to me, and I will share with all the Assembly members. But the Tories are now out of time. But I did find it interesting of how does one define unnecessary. But I did find this debate interesting. But I'm now going to hang on. There's a list of people here. Okay, I'm going to bring in Assembly member. Oh, sorry, I was going to bring in Assembly member Tony Devilish, but unfortunately the group is now out of time, so I can't. But I'm going to bring in Assembly member Berry.
Thank you very much, Chair. I've got a tiny bit of time left, and I just wanted to reflect back on the kind of communications we're getting, because I've been getting a lot of emails, and by and large, the people who are against this scheme are being terribly reasonable and just pointing out to me that they've got a degree of car dependency and they're worried about the cost to them of changing their vehicles. We're getting some quite constructive conversations about, what they would need in order to do that. But something you said earlier on was, you said that some of the responses that violated a TfL policy on workplace violence and aggression have been discounted or set aside. Perhaps by writing to us, if you can't do much in the 1 minute I've got left, could you tell us more about that? Because it concerns me if the things that come to us come through the Right to Them website largely, and that does carry out a verification process. What kinds of things have been coming in that you might have to subject them to a violence and aggression and abuse policy?
So to put it in context, it's a very, very small number of the responses. So in some 15,000 responses, it's 24. 24 were identified as abusive, and therefore the content has not been considered.
The Mayor said it in his introductory speech earlier on.
Deputy Mayor, you don't need to answer that question because the Tories are out of time. And the Conservatives.
Wait, I have 23 seconds.
I can see a Tory split story developing here, Chair. Oh, dear. Another Tory split story.
Okay, but let's allow Assemblymember Berry carry on. She has time on her clock, I think.
With my final 23 seconds, can you write to us with that potentially and just let us know? Because just be interesting to know what went on there in order for those to get through in the first place.
Sure, of course. I mean, determine the extent to which we reveal the content of abusive messages and all the rest of it, and wouldn't want to put anyone in an awkward position. But absolutely, we can do that.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. We're nearly on the last run. Assemblymember Baker.
Thank you, Chair. Sorry, I was just I was tremendously excited today that everyone's been so interested in the thing that I've been interested in for 6 months and been banging on, and everyone's been ignoring me. But yay! But what I actually wanted to ask, Mr. Mayor, because I'm very interested in what the Conservative group are discussing about the Londoners being very interested in feeling like today is a vote on the ULEZ expansion rather than the NTS. Now, I totally understand that, of course, many Londoners will be genuinely interested in the result and the debate, and I hope that people watching have been, because I think it has actually been a pretty good debate. But I'm wondering whether the reason so many Londoners are getting those things confused might be the communications from the GLA Conservatives, because just scrolling through Twitter, and they've very, very handily retweeted many of the Conservative AMs, today London Assembly members will vote. They can vote to reject Sadiq Khan's disastrous ULEZ expansion. So if you're wondering why people are getting it confused, then you might want to clarify your communications. Absolutely fine if you want to do it like that, but you might wonder why...
Chair, that's getting set and match. Come on.
This is
credit where it's due.
I wonder, Mr. Mayor...
That's a masterclass, come on.
I wonder, Mr. Mayor, whether you might wonder if you're clear why people at Londoners are getting it confused. Mr. Mayor, are you confused? Why do you think Londoners are getting the subjects confused?
I'm speechless by the powerful dissection of
no, I can do better than that.
The Tories, split or otherwise, in this group, and you can see they're drowning because they're trying to praise first Sean, and then you worry about who your friends are, Ellie and Sean. That's what I say in relation to the last speaker from the Tory party. But look, the point I made in relation to the types of politician you want to be, you either address people's fears and concerns, genuine concerns. I mean, genuine concerns, address them. What are your concerns? And you, in a very responsible way, raised issues to Seb and me in relation to the concerns that you've got. Or you can play on people's concerns. You can play on their fears. And you can whip up hysteria, misinformation, fake news. And what you're seeing with, I'm afraid, this bunch of Tories is an example of the sort of stuff that I think is the worst of British politics. And I think what we want to see is a situation where we as politicians use the position we have in an unpatronising way to educate people. How many Londoners realise that the air is dangerous? How many people realise that you can't see this stuff, it's poisonous? It's the same sort of conversations that progressives had when it came to the Clean Air Act, the Great Smog in the 50s. The sort of conversations progressives had in relation to tobacco. 20 years ago, when we knew 40 years ago tobacco was bad for you. The sort of conversations had in relation to sugar, consequences of people's diet. The sort of conversations that were had 20 years ago, people ignored around climate change. So they will play on fears because I think it gets them votes. They think pitting communities against each other, scaring people, wins them votes. I make this point. If it is the case that the Conservatives are right, that today is a vote on expanding ULEZ, I make 2 points. One is I've not made a decision. But if it is the case that the majority of this Assembly vote to revise MTS, under her definition of the purpose of this Assembly, it means that the decision to expand ULEZ has been approved by the Assembly.
Thank you, Mr Mayor, and thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Assembly Member. Okay, I think we have come to an end now. We now have reached the end of the question and answer session. Thank you to our guests for answering our questions today. The Assembly has further items of business to deal with, but you're welcome to leave the chamber if you so wish.
Chair, I'm happy to leave Seb here.
Yes, to answer supplementary questions. You can leave too, sir. Okay. Will the Assembly agree to suspend Standing Order 2.9a in accordance with the provision of Standing Order 1.1h in order to allow the remaining business agenda to be completed? Okay. I was going to propose a 10-minute break, but I do also know that there are two amendments which are being circulated or have been circulated, and groups may want to consider them in their in the recess. So I was proposing that that maybe we go for 15 or 20 minutes, but I'm entirely in your hands. 10 minutes? What? Okay, in that case, we're going for 10 minutes. And I'll see you again at 4:40. We now move to the formal consideration of the proposed revision to the transport strategy and debate of the motion on the agenda set out in my name, namely that the Assembly notes the proposed revision to the Mayor's transport strategy. In a moment, I will ask members whether there are any amendments to that motion, and I know there are two. Can I remind members that in accordance with the Standing Order 3.19F and the provisions of Section 42B of the GLA Act 1999, as amended, any motion proposing a rejection of the strategy requires at least 2/3 of the Assembly members present and voting to vote in favour in order to be carried. Abstentions do not count as a vote against and so are excluded from the calculation of the 2/3 majority. Any other motion requires a simple majority of members to be carried but is not binding on the Mayor. In accordance with the Standing Order 4.2a and following discussions with Assembly party groups, I have agreed to vary the time limit for speeches for the remainder of the meeting so that the mover of the motion or amendment may speak for up to 3 minutes. The second of the motion or amendment may speak up to 2 minutes, and any other speeches may last up to 2 minutes. I know there are 2 amendments to the motion in my name, and I'm going to ask now first Assembly Member Rogers to move his amendment.
Thank you, Chair. GLA Conservatives oppose the expansion of the ULEZ and the introduction of London-wide road user charging, as outlined in the revisions. But we've rehearsed our examples for why at length and in many other sessions of the Assembly. But we recognise that not all groups share our views. But I hope that, despite that, Assembly members can agree with our amended motion. I think it's worth looking again at what the Mayor is asking this Assembly to do today. So TfL consulted on the proposed revision to the MTS. The consultation closed on the 29th of July. But that report into the consultation has not yet been published, and today the Mayor is asking us to endorse his planned change without seeing that report. Now, that report could well show a majority of respondents in support of the changes that are proposed today, or it could show a strong majority opposing it. But the implications of the Mayor's actions are that the views of those respondents do not matter. Now, I believe it is our duty, both as individual Assembly members and collectively as the Assembly, to fully scrutinise the Mayor's proposal. And the Mayor has deliberately chosen to make that impossible for us. And as a result, the Assembly has lost opportunities, valuable opportunities for scrutiny. And scrutiny is our main purpose, is what we are here to do. Less haste in this could have meant additional scrutiny of these revisions. We could have examined them, the proposals, alongside the consultation responses. We could have, even if we'd so chosen, to have perhaps held an additional session of the Transport Committee to look at them. But again, the Mayor's rush has made this impossible. So if we reject this proposed revision, we can make it clear that we will not accept this behaviour, and we can make it clear that if the Mayor does want us to endorse these changes, then he needs to publish the consultation report first. He needs to give us the information we need to make an informed decision first. But if, on the other hand, we choose to rubber stamp this change, then we will be telling the Mayor that we're fine, we're happy for him to treat Londoners and the Assembly with contempt. So I urge all sides of the Assembly to back this amended motion, reject the MTS revision, and force the Mayor to think again. Thank you.
Can I ask Assembly Member Garrett to second this? Or?
I'm happy to second it and to reserve my right to speak later. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you. I'm now going to ask the second amendment to be moved, and that's in the name of Assembly Member Pigeon.
Thank you very much indeed, Chair. I'm going to use this also to make my contribution to the debate, given the time today. And I have 2 reactions to the main motion that's before us. One, the content is welcome, but the timing and process are not, and that's an element I do agree with Assembly Member Rogers. As I mentioned earlier today when I was questioning the Mayor, I can recall as far back as July 2017 when we were looking at his transport strategy, the strategy we're being asked to amend today, that I challenged him why it did not include road pricing as an alternative to the congestion charge and why it didn't go further, because you could see that's exactly what would be needed in the future. And I talked about needing mayoral leadership on this issue. And I pointed to the billions of pounds lost to business through congestion and, of course, the cost to the health of Londoners. And, of course, in September that year, and Assembly Member Prince will recall this, he wrote to the Mayor as chair of the Transport Committee to recommend changes to the draft strategy as described in our committee's report, London Stalling. And this included a clear recommendation from the cross-party committee to reform the congestion charge to target congestion more effectively and develop proposals for a wider road pricing scheme that could integrate all existing road charges. So none of this is new to us, and the Mayor ignored our considered, reasoned argument at their time. And here we are today with a rushed amendment that would have been unnecessary if the Mayor had listened to our wise words back in 2017. But it's taken him 5 years, Keith, but finally he agrees with the Transport Committee on this. And I want to be clear what the Liberal Democrats' position is. You know, I've stood in the last 2 GLA elections on a platform of dealing with London's polluted air and tackling congestion through road pricing. And we believe everyone has the right to breathe clean air wherever they live in our city. And we therefore support further ULEZ expansion whilst tackling congestion and pollution on our streets. And this is why we'll be not supporting today the Conservatives' amendment, because that rejects this revision. However, we wish to see an expanded ULEZ go hand in hand with important mitigations. People need to have a genuine alternative to the car, so we want to see investment in public transport in outer London. We want a comprehensive scrappage scheme that covers small businesses, charities, those on low incomes and disabled Londoners, and a longer period for the next expansion of ULEZ to give people a bit more time to move to cleaner vehicles. And we want mobility credits to be part of this scheme. And that's what our amendment is about today. As we discussed earlier, we also think there's time for a mature conversation about pay as you drive on London's roads, with London leading the way. Now, the process has not been good practice. We've also put a reference to that in our amendment today, and that's why we flagged that, and we hope that this does not set a precedent for future strategies. I hope all groups will support our amendment and note the proposed revision.
Thank you. Assemblymember Bukhari, you want to?
I'm just formally seconding. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So now we'll open up a debate to consider both the amendments and the substantial motion. Is there any contributions?
Chair, sorry, could I just say that for all votes tonight, I'd like to be recorded.
On a named basis? Okay. Any other contributions? Okay. Assemblymember Boff?
This Assembly rarely has the opportunity to actually change something through its votes. We're a scrutiny body predominantly, and most of the time we just make advice to the Mayor. There are 2 amendments before us this afternoon, evening, coming on for. There are 2 amendments. One is an amendment that the Mayor doesn't have to pay any attention to, which is that proposed by the Liberal Democrat group. And the other just says to the Mayor, pause, reflect. You know, one of our responsibilities here are quasi-legal. And our legal responsibilities when we come to consider something, especially when we will be asked to use our executive power on this, is that we take into consideration all material evidence. Now, what clearer material evidence could there be for deciding this on this change than consultation from Londoners? Why is it we're being forced to approve this now and not after the consultation? So this doesn't say to the Mayor, never come back to our doors again with any proposal whatsoever for an all-London ULEZ. It's saying, come back to us, when we have the evidence in front of us, when we have the real opinions of Londoners, and then we can reach a decision. I mean, one of the things I would look forward to is that the consultation responses are broken down by assembly constituency. I think that's the kind of feedback that would be appreciated by many around this table, especially when they're considering which way to vote this evening. Thank you.
Assemblymember Bailey.
Thank you, Chair. Listening to the Mayor's speech then and certain members around the chamber, lots of falsities were floated, and I'll use the word lies. The Mayor lied on several occasions about what appeared in my manifesto, and etc., etc. And he asked us to reflect on the developments that have happened, which has brought this vote, made this vote relevant, made that we need it. And I'll tell you the development that happens. There have been two. One is 60% of Londoners have voted against this, and two, the Mayor has written a book. Now, the 60% of Londoners that voted against this understand that air quality is vitally important to us, and also understand it's not racist, but here in London it is class. It is class that exposes people to this poor air quality. And the way in which the Mayor has laid out this policy means that he will not be helping those people who are most affected by class, because he's robbing people of their employment. This will mean that many of the small organisations that employ the most vulnerable people in London will simply cease to exist. So when he and his deputy mayor say that there is, winners and losers, and it's acceptable to have some losers, he needs to reflect, as all of us do, on who those losers actually are. This is a policy that will punish poor Londoners. And let's be clear, it will punish poor Londoners for almost no improvement in air quality, according to the Mayor's own study. If this was going to make sweeping changes to the health of Londoners, to the poor air that are or are not exposed to, we back it all the way. I certainly would. But it is not. All of the points made about road user charging, for me personally, are not that big a problem. I think it's coming in the future, like it or not. I just believe Londoners shouldn't be forced to pay for it. It should be a national scheme. We don't want a situation where Londoners pay a bill here and then a separate bill if they decide to leave London. But the key thing is this: the Mayor has not been truthful about what this is really about. The Mayor has not laid out the argument fairly. He's laid out the argument in the most disingenuous way and made false accusations against a number of people.
Okay. Thank you, Assemblymember Bailey. Next contribution is from Assemblymember Hall.
Thank you, Chairman. I do not understand why the Mayor is so unhappy to let us share Londoners' views before any of us have to vote on this. Why? What does he know that we don't? Why is he hiding it? Why is he hiding behind it? I just don't know. This is indeed a vote on the ULEZ. Residents know it, Londoners know it, and actually, some of you may be shaking your head, you know it as well. And I can guarantee the majority do not want it. I met David Simmons last night on the train on my way home. He is exceptionally concerned. He's the MP for Pinner, Ruislip and Northwood, or Ruislip, Northwood and Pinner. So that's Hillingdon and Harrow councils. So just so that the two Assembly members concerned are informed of this. We were discussing the problems that small businesses are going to have that have got vehicles that are perfectly usable, perfectly roadworthy, but they're not compliant. We were talking about the difficulties to carers who care, and very often not official carers, carers that look after their elderly relatives. Very often they cannot afford to replace their cars. And they are all going to be in this dreadful position as an if, or in fact, most of us believe, when he puts the ULEZ in. We need to look at the cost of living at the moment. The Mayor quite rightfully brings it up. But with all his extra taxes and charges, this will be yet another burden for so many Londoners. My colleague said that it probably will come in at some point. So I would say, for goodness sake, is now the right time? Are we not entitled to see what the Londoners said? Because I think we are, and we will have a named vote, and I'm sure Londoners that are really against it will look at how people have voted in this chamber. And just to warn you all, I do believe that Outer London voters will not want this put in. Thank you.
Thank you, Assemblymember Hall. Any other contributions? Assemblymember Best?
Thank you, Chair. I think over the entire ULEZ issue, the Mayor has misled the Assembly so many times over the last few months. He's misled the Assembly in consistently telling us that poorer Londoners don't own cars when we know that they do. And he's consistently misled us in the Assembly over the potential effects and impact of the ULEZ so many times. And he's misled us so many times to the extent that on this issue he has lied to the Assembly in this room consistently. And I think he has lied as well when it comes to representing the views of Conservatives and our group. Personally, you all know because I preach about it a lot, I believe that the vegan, plant-based lifestyle is the best way to view climate change. You might not know that I use reusable nappies, and that is not for the love of changing nappies. That is, again, for the environment. And you may have heard me go on about the Edmonton incinerator. And what you also may not know is the first issue that I took up when I came in as a councillor in London was the campaign for a Keen for Clean campaign on the air across the A406. Now, the reason that I have a genuine concern about the ULEZ is because it doesn't, I think, effectively tackle air quality while using a massive, massive investment to do so. And I heard it again today. There seems to be some sort of weird synopsis going on that we somehow believe that any compliant car somehow is not polluting. It is polluting, but there seems to be this narrative that we can forget about the polluting vehicles across London and just tackle the non-compliant vehicles. And the non-compliant vehicles often belong to those older Londoners, those people that don't actually travel very often. They are not owned by the big businesses. They are not owned by the people that are the real contributors to polluting air in London. And that is my point, and that is this group's point, that there are much better ways that we can tackle the air quality in London, and those ways do not put the cost of doing so on the most vulnerable in our society. And I know that London-wide Assembly members will have received the hundreds of emails on this. I'm not going to be personally affected by ULEZ. I won't have to pay that charge. And I think many of the Assembly members also won't be affected. But those people that email me, they're the smallest businesses, they're the smallest charities, they are the carers, they need to make those journeys, and we still do not have the information that lets us know this is the best way to tackle air quality, and that is why we cannot rubber stamp it together. And I urge Assembly members to think again, wait for the consultation, wait for more information, wait for alternatives that may be better, and let's vote, thank you, based on the information that we have.
Assembly Member Fortune.
Thank you. Let's be very, very clear. We are here today with the opportunity to vote to prevent the expansion of the ULEZ to Outer London. And we only have this vote due to a bureaucratic necessity. I have absolutely no doubt whatsoever that if the Mayor could, he would push through this expansion unilaterally. But he can't. He needs us here today to vote for it. So it's only really by chance that we have that vote on ULEZ, and we have the opportunity to represent those residents who have written to us. Now, our position has always been that making the air cleaner is a right and noble cause. But we do not believe that the expansion of a camera network is the best way to achieve it, and we have made suggestions. All that will do is tax the poorest in London. It will close small businesses. It will impact the sick and the disabled the hardest. The Labour Party members here today have got a choice. They can support their mayor, or they can support their constituents, the people they serve, the people who will be burdened with the heavy cost of the mayor's desired legacy. And in the days forward, when they raise issues of financial struggle and hardship that are impacting on the poorest Londoners, they will have to admit that today they used this rare and precious vote to make their lives worse.
Thank you. Any other contributions? Okay.
Chair, thank you very much. Look, I can be confused. The Tories seem to be all over the place in their position, whether they're against ULEZ or they're just seeking a delay or not. You go and have a look at their social media, it tells you what their position is. It's not about concern for air quality, it's about they don't want to see it. It's not about delaying it, they just don't want it implemented. And the first bit of honesty we've had this afternoon comes from the previous speaker to me. That's the first indication of where we are today. Delay, delay, delay. It's always been delayed. They've never voted for a public health improvement in air quality in this chamber over the many administrations they've got. And of course, we're all concerned about cost of living issues, but don't tell me today, of all days, about cost of living issues around ULEZ when this government is placing the worst cost of living issues, and actually in the run-up to it, your previous administration, Conservatives, if that's what you want to call yourself, have actually placed a burden on us that's unnecessary and not required in terms of cost of living. So let's set that aside. What we're doing today is about a public health requirement that is about not people that write to us, about young people that write to us, a lot of the elderly that won't be writing to us. And it's about quality, about some of those issues about that comes through. They're not writing to you, and you've not shown any concern about that because you want to stop this policy. I respect that. You take your position, but don't misrepresent it when you're writing elsewhere. And it, of course, you can talk about liars, but actually, you've got very good experience about partying and lying around that and not have the impersonal position to own up to it and stand up and let other people take the cam for it. Please don't lecture me about lying and dishonesty in terms of this place and this chamber. So I want to say something about that. So we're voting on a principle. We're not voting to extend ULEZ. The only reason why we're having this debate and why the Tories want you to say this is about that. It's because that's what they've been putting out in terms of their social media. It's about stopping ULEZ today. It's not. It's about the principle of clean air and policies that attack poor air quality and make a difference. Those have never actually advocated those policies. They might have jumped on the bandwagon. They might have jumped on the bandwagon to do it. We're talking about implementing practical policies that make a difference. Chair, I just want to be very quick. I want to thank the Lib
Chair, you've got to have some respect for the time.
Motion forward. There are some real messages in there that we need to listen to. We won't be supporting that amendment today, but thank you for putting that forward for debate.
Oh, that's rich coming from you. That's rich from coming from you.
Thank you. By the way, there's no rule saying that you only can contribute for once. I have all evening to be here.
I'm glad you do.
Chair, just a point of order, Assembly Member Deval clearly pointed at me and talked about me being written about...
Can you please stand up?
Oh, for a point? Okay.
Yes.
I thought that was just for speeches, but I can stand up. I only wanted to suggest a reply to that point to say that I've been written to by people in their 90s. Are they not old? I mean, at what level do you classify old? I've been written to by young mothers who have no idea how they're going to take their children to nurseries and then get to their jobs. These are young people as well. I don't know where these lines blow. It affects everyone. But again, you haven't answered the question. You're talking about those people with non-compliant cars. It's about the compliant cars as well. There's pollution everywhere, and we've made that point and you haven't addressed it. How does ULEZ help get those compliant vehicles off the road? Because they pollute as well, and there seems to be this narrative they don't.
Okay, thank you.
And
Chair, if I've been named, Chair, I think I was named, pointed.
Well, you would
know.
no, you weren't named.
Of course we will address those
Can you
issues.
please let me chair the meeting?
He was named to say that.
If you listen carefully to debates, there are plans to address those issues. People are not letting that go. But what we're addressing here today is about the low admission zone. So all those issues about saying we can't take this decision today because we haven't done this or we haven't done that are just not there. You've not proven yourselves. You've not stood up for the public in terms of taking decisions on practical policies that make a difference. What you can't get away with is that ULEZ does not work. It works. It's been proven to work. You might try and rubbish. Might try to rubbish the statistics, but independently, it makes a difference.
Now look, I agree. I generally do have all night here, and I'm a guy who used to do 80 hours on a constantly. I used to clock in on Friday morning 9 o'clock and finish 6 o'clock in the evening on Monday evening. So I have the stamina to be here. So.
Well, we'll see you later then.
Thank you, Chair. The Green Group is voting against both the Lib Dem and Conservative amendments. We are not convinced to reject the strategy change, and we do know enough to make up our minds that we want to enable a London-wide ULEZ. We know there is some significant opposition. We are listening, and we know all the extra health benefits of reducing traffic and increasing physical activity. We've seen too much delay already, and we cannot support any more dither or delay to cleaning up London's air. Greens have consistently called for a London-wide ULEZ, so no one is left out of the clean air zone. And we could have had a ULEZ London-wide by now if we'd had a Green mayor. Now, the transport strategy should have been correct in the first place. In June 2017, my Left Out Londoners report said he must bring in a London-wide ULEZ for all vehicles, and that was after I had talked to a lot of outer Londoners. Now, as the Clean Air Bill races through the parliamentary process, following extraordinary campaigning by Rosamond Kissy-Deborah, who is in the audience still today, whose daughter literally has air pollution as cause of death on her death certificate, it would be just disgraceful for this Assembly to introduce any delay before bringing in the London-wide ULEZ. How could any of us ever look Rosamond and the other clean air campaigners in the face again if we don't support the strongest possible strategy today? Thank you.
I'm going to give the chair up to the deputy chair for a few moments, because I think it's because I am going to speak to this. The reason I'm going to speak to this issue is that I am, and I recognise when Andrew Brough said that being chair means that we have to be quiet all the time, but I think this is a very important issue, particularly as a letter written to me has been brought to the attention of the Assembly. And I'm concerned, right, of the impression it makes. And I am also a constituency member, that I have to go and justify my position. The first thing I want to say is this. I believe that we're discussing here the variation to the mayor's strategy, and this is not about ULEZ. And yesterday I was in a debate, discussing with young people about today's work. And they asked me a very important question. Because they said, the people who have been writing to you, who are these people? This is really about our tomorrows, about the fact that our future, of young people having their lungs stunted by the air quality in London. Young people who are concerned about their environment. I have had letters written by constituents. I identify with the florists, I identify with those people who are finding difficult cost of living, and I think we need to help them. But the time to do that is when the mayor has made a decision on the ULEZ, and I think we should be arguing all those points when that point comes, because I'm very much aware to this point. But at this moment, it's about what are the frameworks to the mayor's strategy that we want to vote for. And I'm also reminded of the indigenous Americans have a saying that we don't own the earth, we only have it on lease for the next generation. And I'm really concerned about that we set up the right frameworks for the future of our children, for our grandchildren, for the earth we want to create. And I can't live with the fact that 4,000 people died prematurely in London, and Hillingdon is the 8th number on that list, right? And you all got the list, right? The air quality sees no boundaries. It sees no distinction between inner London and outer London. And I wanted to do the very best for my constituents. So thank you very much for giving me the time to speak to you. Thank you. Thank you.
Shut you up there.
It's the inbuilt clock that tells me 2 minutes is up. Okay. Look, I think now we are about summing it up, right? I'm going to ask the seconders, right, who reserve their positions, right, to say if they want to sum up now or not, right? Did you want to say anything, Assembly? Let me see.
Assembly Member Bakari and Assembly Member Garrett, Chair.
Do you want to? Okay. In that case, we'll go to the summing up by the proposers, right? And the first motion we considered was the one proposed by Assembly Member Rogers. I feel like my colleagues have said it. Okay. Assembly Member Pigeon?
Yes. Briefly, I just want to make it clear on record. We are not making the decision on expanding the ULEZ or bringing in a specific road pricing scheme. We have the power to make a decision on a strategy, decide whether we think the strategy is appropriate. And it's misleading to say that we suddenly have this power to bring in a policy. Goodness me, I wish the Assembly had a lot more powers. We've spent 14 years here doing this. But actually, this is about the strategy and the scheme. It is then for the Mayor and his team to put forward and make decisions on whether schemes should come in. The former Mayor supported road pricing. It was in his Mayor's transport strategy. He supported some of the ULEZ work as well. This Mayor now wants to strengthen his strategy in this area. The Transport Committee has supported this previously. As I said earlier, it takes leadership. It takes a lot of leadership to make bold decisions like this. I hope the Mayor will consider some of the mitigation measures we have proposed. But, you know, when the plastic bag charge came in, loads of people were up in arms about that. But it's changed all of our behaviour. How often do any of us pay for a plastic bag because we bring our own? It's very rare. And I have no doubt the same will apply for cleaner vehicles, for a pay-as-you-go to drive a future policy. It will make us think and change our behaviour. And we're looking at the strategy to do that. Ultimately, it's for the Mayor to make his decision on what goes forward.
Thank you. So I'm now going to put these amendments to the vote first. The first amendment, which we are going to consider, the ones which by the Conservatives. I got that right? By the Conservatives, who call upon the strategy being rejected, right? And that's the most damning amendment if it was to go through in terms of the Mayor's proposal. No. Okay. I mean that would be the amendment that would over.
Chair, could I suggest that it would be the most impactful? Perhaps we could use that
I would
word.
say, okay.
Well, no, because it would
reject the motion in my name, right? So let's put the vote to the Conservative amendment, which says recorded, which says that this Assembly hereby resolves to reject the Mayor's proposed revision. That's the amendment I'm putting.
Thank you, Chair. It's been requested that there be a named vote on this amendment and the next amendment. This is the amendment in the name of Assembly Member Rogers. It's an amendment to reject. Just to be clear, all amendments at this stage require a simple majority in order to be incorporated into the substantive motion. So at the moment, we're just voting on amendments, not a motion. So I'm going to call each member in alphabetical order with the Deputy Chair and the Chair listed last. I would ask all Assembly members to ask if they are voting for, against or abstaining from voting. So Assembly Member Ahmad.
Against.
Assembly Member Bailey.
For.
Assembly Member Baker.
Against.
Assembly Member Berry.
Against.
Assembly Member Best.
For.
Assembly Member Bakari.
Against.
Assembly Member Clark.
Against.
Assembly Member Desai. Against. Assembly Member Devonish. Assembly Member Duval.
Against.
Assembly Member Fortune.
For.
Assembly Member Garrett.
For.
Assembly Member Hall.
For.
Assembly Member Harani.
Against.
Assembly Member McCartney. Assembly Member Moema. Oh, she's left. Thank you. Assembly Member Pigeon.
Against.
Assembly Member Polanski.
Against.
Assembly Member Prince. For. Assembly Member
Sorry,
Rogers. For. Thank you. Assembly Member Russell.
Against.
Assembly Member Sheikh.
Against.
Assembly Member Boff.
For.
Assembly Member Dr. Sahota, Chair.
Against.
So, Chair, that is 9 votes in favour, 14 votes against. That amendment is not carried. We move on to a vote on the next amendment, Chair, which is the amendment in the name of Assembly Member Pigeon. Again, I will ask Assembly members to indicate whether they are voting for, against or abstaining. Assembly Member Ahmad.
Against.
Assembly Member Bailey.
Against.
Assemblymember Baker.
Against.
Assemblymember Berry.
Against.
Assemblymember Best.
Against.
Assemblymember Bakari.
For.
Assemblymember Clark.
Against.
Assemblymember Desai. Assemblymember Devonish. Assemblymember Duval.
Against.
Assemblymember Fortune.
Against.
Assemblymember Garrett.
Against.
Assemblymember Hall.
Against.
Assemblymember Harani. Assemblymember McCartney. Assemblymember Pigeon.
For.
Assemblymember Polanski.
Against.
Assemblymember Prince. Assemblymember Rogers. Assemblymember Russell.
Against.
Assemblymember Sheikh.
Against.
Assemblymember Boff.
Against.
And Assemblymember Dr. Sater, Chair.
Against.
That is 21 votes against, Chair, and 2 votes in favour. That amendment is not carried. We move on to the vote on the substantive motion on the agenda in the name of the Chair. Can I confirm whether we're having a named vote on this as well? Thank you. Again, I will call members in alphabetical order and ask them to indicate whether they are voting for, against or abstaining on the motion in the name of the Chair, which is a motion to note the revision before the Assembly today. Assemblymember Ahmad.
For.
Assemblymember Bailey.
Against.
Assemblymember Baker.
For.
Assemblymember Berry.
For.
Assemblymember Best.
Against.
Assemblymember Bakari.
For.
Assemblymember Clark.
For.
Assemblymember Desai. Assemblymember Devonish. Assemblymember Duval.
For.
Assemblymember Fortune.
Against.
Assemblymember Garrett. Assemblymember Hall.
Against.
Assemblymember Harani. Assemblymember McCartney. Assemblymember Pigeon.
For.
Assemblymember Polanski. Assemblymember Prince. Assemblymember Rogers. Assemblymember Russell.
For.
Assemblymember Sheikh.
For.
Assemblymember Boff.
Against.
And Assemblymember Dr. Sahota, Chair.
For.
That is 14 votes in favour of the motion, Chair, and 9 votes against. That motion is carried. Can I confirm if there are any other amendments or motions that Assembly members wish to move? Is the Assembly content to confirm that it has concluded consideration of the Mayor's proposed revision to the transport strategy?
Yes.
Thank you, Chair.
Okay, hang on. The next meeting of the London Assembly is scheduled to be a plenary meeting, which will take place at 10 o'clock on Thursday, the 1st December 2022, in the chamber at the City Hall. And I want to just give my advance apologies for that because I won't be here. And there's no other urgent business to be considered, so I call this plenary session to end. All those prepared to have.